OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
A very good morning to you. Welcome along this Tuesday morning to OTB AM. It is the 9th of February. That's our public service done for the day. I hope you're very well. Wherever you are watching us, listening to us, maybe you get us on podcast a little bit later on. However you're consuming us this morning, you're very welcome. You can get us on youtube.com/Off the Ball, and we're live on the OTB Sports app every morning as a radio show or indeed as video if you'd prefer to see myself and Eoin. Eoin, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well, Ger. How are things?
I'm good. And there's many things for us to talk about, including what the team is going to look like for this France game, which is breathing down our necks pretty quickly. When you look at it, the start of the campaign, yeah, well, we'll get that win in Wales and then we'll ride that into the France game and it'll be a week and it'll be, wow, short, sharp shock and we're top of the table. 2 wins from 2, classic stuff. Or it's like, ooh, now we could have 0 wins from 2 because we were beaten by Wales, who I would argue are still rubbish, and it turns out everybody else agrees with that now too. And we've got France this weekend, you know, riding in on their blue horses to thrash us.
Well, Neil made a really good point in the pre-show meeting that Ireland could play brilliant this weekend and they could still lose by 30 points to France this weekend, which is a fairly scary prospect that it felt like over the last couple of years, maybe not so much with France, but definitely with England, that there was nothing anybody in the Irish team could do about the dominance that a team like England would enjoy against Ireland. And it looks like on the evidence of last weekend that France have got to that stage now as well, where they're going to be able to dominate Ireland. So I would say the mood music isn't great. I would say that we're now entering into this phase of eternal conversation about who Ireland's starting 10 is going to be. This is a little bit of a preview of what the post-Johnny Sexton era is going to look like. Because if he is injured and he is out for this weekend, then there are cases to be made for a multitude of different out-halves.
Well, this weekend, absolutely. I think next year we're all just going to assume that Joey Carbery's fit and he's our number 10 and everybody is... who's the backup to Joey Carbery? The Mail are reporting this morning, and I think they're the only ones who have it at the moment, that it's going to be Ross Byrne coming in and Rhys Ruddock coming in. Rhys Ruddock's going to come into the team, so he's the direct replacement for O'Mahony, and Byrne is the Sexton replacement if they need him, but he will also be on the bench if Sexton makes it.
So Billy Byrne's the start?
No.
Oh, sorry, if Sexton's... Sorry, he starts if Sexton's out and Billy Burns is your backup and Ross Byrne starts?
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. That's not something we would have been too surprised with, I guess, over the last couple of days. It's Ross Byrne probably deserves his opportunity at this stage as well, like with Sexton absent this weekend, and we don't know what the situation is going to be on that one just yet, but after what happened with Billy Burns on Sunday, there's no question that you can't put Ross Byrne now at this stage. When does he get an opportunity if it's not going to be this week after what happened to Billy Burns with Rhys Ruddock? I think there's people who probably wanted to see a bit of Rhys Ruddock last weekend anyway. Bit of brute force, bit of extra grunt in that back row. Going to get that this weekend.
Yeah, I think that there was people making the case that he could have started last weekend. I mean, O'Mahony would have been dropped, or would they have dropped O'Mahony? They would have had to. Yeah, I don't think that they were ever going to drop O'Mahony for last weekend, but, you know, that question that we were asking about what are the repercussions for being sent off in a big game like this, how does that damage you when it comes to a selection meeting the next time you're available for selection? Is there a big asterisk beside you when they're talking about you? And as I said yesterday on the show, there's credit in the bank from O'Mahony's perspective, but is it enough versus somebody who, say, plays the full 80 minutes next week and gets through 27 tackles and 14 carries and wins 2 steals and maybe isn't the world-class line-out operator, but equally puts in one of those performances where you can tick these boxes and know, okay, our team will have achieved this amount at the end of the game. If I pick him, this guy got sent off the last time he played. It's an interesting selection dilemma. What do you do?
Like, I think that, actually Alan Quinlan was making the point last Friday that with Doris being injured, he wouldn't have been averse to seeing Peter O'Mahony at 7 and Rhys Ruddock at 6. Obviously, that's not going to be an option over the next little while because he's going to be suspended, obviously. But that's what he wanted to see. Like, so that's how high the Peter O'Mahony credit would have been. It wouldn't have been a replacement necessarily for O'Mahony. But it is still a fairly tough-looking back row. It's going to be Van der Fleer and Stander who stay at 7 and 8, and Rhys Ruddock who comes in at 6. Like, he's always been really good. He's always been one of the main reasons why we've spoken about the Irish back row being in a place of real depth over the last few years, because you've always thought about somebody like Rhys Ruddock as an unbelievable option to have off the bench or to come into a squad if there are going to be injuries, and this is exactly one of those weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't actually in the squad at the start of this year. This new era seemed to be one of those players who was on the outside. Didn't get enough time at the World Cup. Certainly he felt that he needed to have been given an opportunity, and was tearing up trees and might have been a free radical in that team in the World Cup when everything looked like it had gone completely stale. So what this team needs is a big performance this weekend with 15 men over the full course of the game. They actually, you can argue that it's kind of a must-win game for the credibility of the coaching ticket in some respects, because last week they get a bit of a free pass because there's a sending off. So, everybody, almost universally, there was a 6 out of 10 for the management, kind of a, did they do well, did they not do well? We can't tell. I'm not going to give them too high a mark because we lost the game, and I'm not going to give them a low mark because they had a man sent off. This week, I think that we can't play well and lose by 30 points. I think that if this coaching ticket credibility is going to continue to grow, and I'm in favour of giving them more time, to be honest, then this game is pretty close to must win, So if we lose this and we lose to England, that's all of a sudden, maybe we lose to Scotland, and we beat Italy. What kind of a Six Nations is that? Not good, Eoin, not good. One win would not be a good Six Nations. So these are the knife edge games. You got to always win your home games in the Six Nations, irrespective of who they're against. And if you don't, there's trouble. So look, we'll talk about this a good bit later on with Rúaidhrí O'Connor. If you want to get in touch, we'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180. Is it a must-win game? Give us your views. We should talk about the other big story that happened on TalkSport yesterday. So it's all over the front of the pages. Daniel Kinahan made contact with Jim White over the weekend and issued him a long and lengthy statement. And it was a 30 minutes of interesting radio.
But yeah, that's definitely the best way to describe it. So if you clicked on TalkSport at 11:30 yesterday morning, you would have been fairly interested by what you heard over the preceding 30 minutes or so. So they come on air, they said around 11:30 that they were advised on Friday that they would be receiving a statement from Daniel Kinahan. So they knew over the course of the weekend that this was going to be something that they'd bring to the table on Monday morning. Jim White, before they actually get to the statement, mentions that Kinahan denies having any knowledge of the threat to the journalists involved in the Panorama documentary, and then says, let's bring you that statement. It's brought to us now in a neutral voice. And I think this is the thing that a lot of people found quite bizarre, that like an unnamed Englishman proceeds to read out the statement. Afterwards, things start to get a little bit weirder. Jim White says, Kinahan reached out to me, spoke to me. I've been in discussion with him. So this is not necessarily something I saw coming. The man who does the transfers, the man who wears the yellow tie, is now our intermediary for Daniel Kinahan. So that kind of came out of the left field a little bit. They've got Matt Lawton on. He's providing analysis in his usual cutting through the nonsense way. He contributed quite a lot. And then they've also got Simon Jordan, who takes a couple of interesting angles on this. He talks about the other ills of boxing. He mentions fights in the Middle East, mentions one of the most murderous regimes where human rights are secondary in terms of Saudi Arabia. He says he objects to trial by media, and he mentions that Daniel Kinahan is currently guilty of nothing. Matt Lawton is still on the line at this point, and he makes the case that he doesn't know how Simon Jordan can make a case that he isn't a malevolent influence on boxing. And Simon Jordan chimes back in and says, how is he a malevolent influence in the business of boxing as it legally stands? Jordan says that he is playing devil's advocate because he doesn't believe it's the job of the media to be judge, jury and executioner. And then this is something that I hadn't heard before. He said, this is Simon Jordan, having been around Daniel Kinahan, I'm aware of his influence. So this is because he's lived in Spain. He's very familiar with the story. He mentions his knowledge of the Spanish police and questions why he hasn't been convicted in Spain. So that was basically the 30 minutes in a nutshell of TalkSport Radio yesterday. Completely surreal. They post audio of the statement on Twitter, and they turn off the replies. And that was their morning's work yesterday.
Yeah, so the statement was about 4.5 minutes long, 3,500 words. We'll get into the details of it with Nicola Tallant of the Sunday World a little bit later on, who's obviously a crime journalist who's been covering the story. But it certainly is on the front page of all of the newspapers today. It's on the back page of the London Times. And what's clear is that the previous statement we had, that Kinahan was stepping away from boxing, isn't going to be true into the future. The commitment from the statement is to stay involved in big world title fights. So it didn't specifically say that that would be the Anthony Joshua Tyson Fury fight, but you know, that certainly was a fight that Tyson Fury had said that Kinahan had been key in brokering. It hasn't fully been agreed just yet, so where that one stands right now, I suppose, is a matter of conjecture, and we can all speculate about that. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because, like, you know, you see the calls for boxing to sort this out. It seems like this is a problem that boxing doesn't exist like that, really, because anybody can decide that they're going to put a title up or no title and just match purses for a fight. So if you and me wanted to put on a fight, we'd be able to pretty much do it fairly quickly if we wanted to. So that's difficult to sort out. And then where do you go from there? Like, it is an intergovernmental, it is an Interpol, it's at that level that something like this has to happen. I guess the one thing is you would ideally prefer more people in boxing to come out and say, actually, it's important that we don't associate ourselves with anybody around whom there are suspicions. Not what Amir Khan was doing yesterday. Amir Khan was coming out and saying that he's a big fan of Daniel Kinahan. He's one of the nicest men he knows, was what Amir Khan came out and said. And as Kieran Cunningham pointed out, Amir Khan is actually involved with one of the licensing bodies. So that's obviously where the power brokers and the thinkers in boxing are. And then it's up to the broadcasters. That's the main part, is like, well, if we're going to put on this fight, then we get to decide who's involved in making the fight. That's where the vast majority of the money comes from. And bear in mind, the vast majority of the money that the broadcasters is putting up is actually the fans. So they're our intermediary here, because they make their money from the fans and they make huge profits off these big fights on pay-per-view. So essentially that's fans' money that the broadcasters get to decide how they'll spend. Obviously they take the risk, and so that's why they make the profit. But that's going to be very interesting to watch over the next while, to see if any of the broadcasters have any issues around the involvement of Daniel Kinahan or MTK or any of that kind of stuff, because up to this point that has not really seemed to be too much of an issue for the broadcasters. No,
and we should say as well, yesterday the other part of the story, another bizarre thread, is what happened in MTK Sydney and the video of Paul Mescal training there. He said he was unaware of links to crime boss Daniel Kinahan, and has said he's no longer training there. So that rounds off that particular storyline.
Yeah, and look, that is interesting, you know, because he's pictured in the ring, and were people wearing MTK t-shirts? Was he curious about what they were? Did he not know what they were? Like, at this stage, I think that is relatively interesting, that perhaps this story hasn't crossed over the way we might have assumed it has. It certainly, maybe it didn't reach lockdown London or Sydney. So what are we at? 7:44 this morning. It's time for us to tell you what's coming up in just a moment. A reminder, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We've got Phil Egan with us. How are you, Phil?
How are you doing, Ger? How are you getting on?
Where are we starting?
Well, we'll start with Leeds. Obviously, good win for them last night. 2-0 win at home to Crystal Palace, into the top half of the Premier League. Jack Harrison got the ball rolling with a goal after only 3 minutes, and Patrick Bamford got the second in the second half. That was his 100th goal in club football. So Leeds into the top half on their return to the Premier League after 16 years. And you look at the teams that came up with them, West Brom and Fulham, they don't even have their combined total. It's still short of what Leeds have done so far in the Premier League this season. And obviously the hope is that Bielsa stays long enough that the Leeds fans get to watch Premier League football under Bielsa in Elland Road, and that pitch is a bit better. Tonight it's about the FA Cup 5th round. First game is Burnley against Bournemouth. That's a Turf Moor from 5:30. Then at 7:30, David Moyes brings West Ham back to Old Trafford, his former club, Manchester United, who'll have to do without Paul Pogba. He's out for the next month with a thigh injury that he picked up against Everton. Obviously, Thomas Souček will be available for West Ham. He had his red card against Fulham overturned. That red card that was given to him was by referee Mike Dean. Now, the chief executive of the Premier League, Richard Masters, has called the abuse aimed at Mike Dean and his family on social media completely unacceptable. He received death threats after sending off Thomas Soucek. Obviously, he had handed out a red card to Jan Bednarik as well for the Southampton and Manchester United game a few days previously. So Dean won't be involved in Premier League games this weekend. However, he is still going to take charge of Leicester and Brighton in the FA Cup tomorrow night. UEFA will today update its 55 National Association members on its proposals to change the format of the Champions League from 2024. So they obviously hope the plans will guarantee clubs more games, more money, and it'll also avert the threat of a breakaway European Super League. The new format will also see more teams in the competition, so it'll go from 32 to 36. Manchester City's away leg of their Champions League last 16 tie against Borussia Mönchengladbach will be played in Hungary, just like Liverpool's away leg against RB Leipzig, and this is due to the coronavirus restrictions in Germany that require anyone travelling to the country from the UK quarantine. The future of the League of Ireland streaming service doesn't look good. Around 11,000 customers pay to watch games on the platform. This is a story in the back of the Irish Independent this morning. Clubs were informed last week by the FAI that the Watch LOI, this is a partnership with RTE in collaboration with GEA Go, wasn't a commercial success, so it won't be rolled out for the full season. And it was Dan McDonald's story. He says the full production costs were more than €300,000 for RTE. That was for half the season. And the FAI did make a small contribution, but obviously it doesn't generate enough money for them. Defending champion Sophia Kennan is into round 2 on day 2 of the Australian Open. She started the defence of her title with a straight sets win over Madison Inglis. Two-time winner Victoria Azarenka out, though she was beaten in straight sets by Jessica Pegula. Rafa Nadal also went to round 2 after a straight sets win over Laszlo Djere. Women's top seed and home favourite Ashley Barty will be in first round action later, and something you just touched on there. I know you'll be mentioning it later on as well with Nicola Tallant, but Daniel Kinahan, one of the nicest guys I've ever met, the words of Amir Khan. And this obviously comes off the back of Kinahan's statement to TalkSport, in which he denied responsibility for the threats issued to the BBC Panorama team. He also said he's still involved in organising some of the biggest fights in world boxing. Khan said he's known Kinahan for some time. He's huge respect for what he's doing for boxing, and he also said that boxing needs people like Daniel Kinahan to keep the sport alive.
Looks like there's not going to be any change on that front anytime soon. Phil, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers. Phil Egan with us there. You can read more from Phil on the OTB Sports app, which you can download in either of the app stores right now. At 7:48, here's what's coming up on the show for you between now and 10 o'clock. Rúaidhrí O'Connor is going to join us imminently to talk to us about Ireland-France and a look back on Ireland-Wales. We'll bring you the sports pages, and then we'll talk to Nicola Tallant, crime journalist with the Sunday World and author, of course, about Daniel Kinahan's continued involvement in boxing. John Duggan at 8:35. Eimear Considine, Ireland Rugby International, going to talk to us about the rugby this weekend, her hopes for the Women's Six Nations, and of course how her sister's getting on in Australia playing in the AFL and concussed at the weekend. Daniel Harris going to talk to us about the 5th round of the FA Cup, and then we'll bring you some of Brian O'Driscoll last night talking about the match at the weekend as well. We'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the number. Rúaidhrí O'Connor is with us this morning from the Irish Independent. Roy, good morning to you. How are you?
Hey, Jerry, how's it going?
You, like the rest of us, are trying to decide what's coming next at number 10, and that's your piece. The succession plan for number 10 must become top priority. A brilliant intro where you talk about how absolutely inexperienced Ian Madigan was when he was given the job of shepherding us through a World Cup quarter-final. Whatever that Oscar Wilde line is about to lose one child to be unfortunate to lose two begins to look like whatever it is. Like, if we repeat the mistakes of the past, we're going to end up getting knocked out in a quarter-final with an inexperienced out-half and wondering, that's funny, that happened to us before.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Madigan had started 5 times for Ireland before he started the World Cup quarter-final, and the only kind of serious opposition he'd faced from the start was Scotland in the Six Nations game. And Jack Carty had started once for Ireland when he played against Japan at the last World Cup, and both have basically had that experience and been thanked for their services and wished good luck, because they didn't really feature for Ireland much after that. I think Madigan won 5 caps afterwards, and Jack Carty played against Russia the following week and never played again. So it feels to me like we're sleepwalking into the same situation again. You know, I think I understand some of the reasons why Johnny Sexton was handed the captaincy, but I think even the fact, we had a captain who was too old at the last World Cup, and that's another situation where we're kind of handcuffing ourselves to a player who'll be 38 in France in 2023. And much and all, as I admire Johnny Sexton, I think there's that clear evidence that he's on the wane already. So, and obviously his injury profile hasn't been great. So there are myriad reasons, I think, to pick a successor, or at least try a couple of successors across next year or two. Kind of figure out which one is the right one, or maybe two, because obviously one of them could get injured, and go for it. And I don't like Harry Burns seems to be the one they talk about as the long-term guy that they rate. Joey Carberry's obviously, if he ever gets fit again, then that they're back on track, because I think Joey Carberry probably would be already in there. And there is the Paddy Jackson issue, where they have this guy that they groom for this position who is no longer available to them and will not be available. Like, it's been a bit of a growing clamour for him to come, not quite to come back, but
we should talk about this, right? There's no way that Paddy Jackson will play for Ireland again, and the IRFU made that decision. That was probably the right decision for Irish rugby. Like, they made that decision. He was not employed. It's not like they decided that, we're going to let you go like any of those players who have been allowed to go in the past. They made a decision. They did not want that associated with rugby on this island. And that's the decision made. So whatever Ugo Monye says on BT, or whatever questions Craig Doyle and Lawrence Delaley are asking, I'm sorry, lads, but like, you can't not address the reasons why he's not playing here in Ireland. It's not because his contract was allowed to run out. It's because they didn't want him playing rugby in Ireland, and because the Irish rugby public did not want that in their team.
Completely agree. And you can't, it's not a rugby issue. It's a much broader issue. And I don't think we probably have that time to go down everything that happened from 2016 to 2018 all over again. But I think it was pretty clear from the RFU at a corporate level that they felt that his, for want of a better phrase, brand was very, very toxic to their brand. So they had to get rid of him. Now, David Newsaport did say later in 2018, in June or July of that year, he was in Australia, he did leave the door open for both Jackson and Olding to come back at some stage. But the Ulster CEO, who was appointed later that year to basically try and move their organisation on from the trauma of that whole episode, did firmly say that there was no chance that they'd bring them home. And I can't see any of the provinces wanting to take on that baggage. London Irish did it. They took a bit of heat for a couple of weeks and seemed to have got over it. And he is playing very, very well, but it's just not an option for Andy Farrell, and it shouldn't be an option either, because that chapter should be firmly closed in Irish rugby. So, like, he's 28 or 29, I can't remember exactly, and he is the perfect age to be Ireland's out half. They did put the work into him. So from like the coaching point of view, it's unfortunate from their point of view that that player is not available to them, but we all understand the reasons why that player is not available to them. So he probably shouldn't be in the conversation at all. And there's been a creep in the last while of his name coming back into things. But maybe it just needs to be asked of Andy Farrell at some stage so that he can nip it in the bud. But he's off the radar. So really, you're looking at Carberry, who's out injured. You're looking at the two lads who are in there, Billy Burns and Ross Byrne. I wouldn't sacrifice Billy Burns on Sunday's altar, but I think you can't really make a mistake of that magnitude again. There's definitely question marks about both of them as long-term out-halves ever getting to the level that Sexton's at, but then maybe the next guy's not going to get to that level. Maybe the next guy's kind of a holder for a Harry Byrne or a Jack Crowley coming through. But those guys are 21. I really like Kieran Frawley at Leinster. He's 23. Healy's done some good stuff for Munster this year, but I think needs a bit more before he starts getting picked for Ireland. But I think they at least should be in squads. Harry Byrne was in before Christmas. And if you look at Garbisi at Italy, like Italy were terrible at the weekend in many ways, but he was quite good, and he's 20. Jalibert's 22. He's starting for France this weekend. If he was fit, Ntamak will be starting for France this weekend, and he's younger than Harry Byrne. We've always had a bit of I don't know whether it's an athletic development point or what it is. Maybe it's because we only have 4 teams and it's the bottleneck is real, but we bring players through very, very slowly in this country. And while it's not the international coach's job to blood players, Andy Farrell's got to be looking at this one and saying, I need my 2023 out half in there now, because there's at most 30 games between now and the big kickoff in France, wherever that'll be, against whoever that'll be. It could be the Springboks, and we don't know who that person is, and I don't think Andy Farrell really knows who that person is. He's kind of fingers crossed it's Johnny Sexton, who has managed to be as good as ever at 38, or Joey Carberry, who has overcome all of his difficulties and gone on to put 2 years of really good work back to back. But both of those at the moment are hitting hope.
One of the elements in this as well, Rúaidhrí, is how they actually fit into the Ireland team. And a 21-year-old is probably going to do a hell of a lot better playing with 14 first-choice players rather than being thrown in with the B team against Italy. And getting minutes beside Conor Murray, for example, if we assume that Murray has arrested his poor form from the last couple of years and is going to be the starting scrum half at the next World Cup, getting reps alongside Murray is probably an important step in that.
Yeah, in the pressure cooker, Billy Burns was making his Six Nations debut last Sunday. So even if he's 26, he's played in big games for Gloucester and Ulster. He's made a couple of international caps. He's only started once against Georgia and came off at half time. That was the biggest kick of his life. And until none of us have ever been in that situation, but I think until you've been in that situation, you don't. When it's on the BBC, it's on. There's a million people watching in Ireland. That's the pressure comes on, and you got to live it until you know whether you're able to do it or not. And you would hope that Billy Burns is all the better for having been handed that opportunity, and even though it went terribly wrong. But you're right. Murray's place, I think, should be up for debate as well after Sunday because he made a number of mistakes. But yeah, he's 31. He's still likely to be very, very much in the mix. And yeah, those players need to play. There's a summer tour. In theory, in a non-COVID world, there's a summer tour to the Pacific Islands this summer. I guess they're probably looking at blooding a player there or two players there, with the idea that some of their main guys will be on the lines. I don't think anyone will be on the lines on current form, but you don't bring Johnny Sexton on that tour per se. You bring a couple of the younger players and you develop them, but that's quite late in the development cycle for 2023. And I know people will say we need to focus on the Six Nations, but these World Cups keep coming around and we keep failing at them, and then we keep having inquests, and then we don't seem to listen to any of the things that we say in the inquest. So we move on and we have a decent Six Nations and kind of walk into the same situations again. So, I mean, this is partly winning Six Nations and partly putting the building blocks in place so that you're future-proofing the team for France. And I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think there was a lot, the way the team finished, and if you look at the 14 players who were on the pitch at the death, there was no one. I think CJ Stander was the older player. Maybe Dave LeCoyne was the oldest player, but there was no one vastly experienced. I don't think anyone had 50 caps. And yet they put together this All Blacks like drive to go with 14 men to go from 122 to the 10-metre line, and then should have gone to the 5-metre line with a chance to win the game. And you look at that and you go, hang on a second, we don't necessarily need these multi-capped 30-something-year-olds to perform. There's good players there who, if they're trusted, can do it. And they're going to make mistakes along the way, but how are they going to learn if they're not given the opportunity?
Yeah, we had this conversation a little bit with Ronan O'Gara before the tournament started, and he was making the point that Sexton could actually elongate his career, and Ireland could manage the end of Sexton's career by bringing him off the bench. So in those final 15 minutes when the game is in the melting pot, you have him coming on instead of going off. And there's probably going to be some periods where that first 40 minutes is a little bit car crashed, or there's a huge mistake made by the 10, whoever that is. But at least you have the possibility of rescuing that and bringing Sexton on. And look, assuming that he doesn't get a bang, he's going to be fit enough for those 20, 25 minutes that are left in matches. You could do the same with Conor Murray, and all of a sudden you've revolutionised the proper game time experience. They're there for the pre-match, they're there for the anthems, and when the crowd is there, that massive roar that happens in those big games. But at least you have the safety net of the cavalry if you need it. It's a difficult conversation to have with somebody as competitive and important to Irish rugby as Sexton, but it might be the right thing to do for the World Cup.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily you're on the bench every week. I mean, look at Leinster, the way they manage those windows where they have a Heineken Cup final on a Saturday, they have a Pro 14 semi-final the following week, and they have a Pro 14 final the week after that. They put Sexton on the bench for the one in the middle. So say you've got Ireland-Wales in the first game and you've France the following week, you say to Johnny, look, you're going on the bench against Wales because we want you, and you're coming on for half an hour to win the game for us, because that's, we have this unbelievably powerful bench with Tadhg Furlong and Dave Kilcoyne and Ian Henderson, and they're going to come on, they're going to get you go forward ball, and we're going to, the lads will keep you in it for 60 minutes, then you're going to come on to win it. And you sell it to them, and you're going to captain the team against France a week later, because we think you're the man to manage that first hour. And he's fresh then coming into the France match instead of banged up. Now, obviously, things can go wrong and you can get injured in 20 minutes as much as you can in 80, but that's taking a tournament view rather than a match view. And I think, like, Ronan O'Gara is one of the most, as well as being a legend and a really good pundit, that we all know him as. Like, I think outside of Ireland, he's being viewed as one of the most respected coaches in the world right now. He's, flying high in the top 14. We should listen to people like that, and as I said, I think Andy Farrell's doing a number of things right when it comes to succession. Maybe they just don't know the identity of the one guy that they think is going to be there, and that's why they're kind of scrambling around in the dark a little bit. But until they try them on this, and there is an element of we have to be patient about it as well. Like, if we call for change, then we can't hammer Billy Burns when he makes a mistake. Maybe that's Billy Burns' chance and gone. I don't know, but there is an element of you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, look, except it wasn't just one mistake from Billy Burns. It was the wrong option, the bad pass, and then ultimately a kick that was in keeping with the stuff that we'd seen over the previous 10 minutes or so. So that's the concern. And look, I haven't seen enough of Ulster play. I don't know if he is international standard just yet. There was one other thing O'Gara said about how the first 5 caps, everything's a blur for you at number 10. So he's still in that blur. And sure, look, if they decide that they think he is the man and they back him, fair enough. But it might be nice to skip down to scroll on to the Harry Byrne. I thought Harry Byrne had been in squads. I thought he had been around. I thought that he was one of those players who would have been in the Carton House bubble already. Or is he not at the moment? Do we actually know what the story is with that?
Well, there's always a chance that the pictures will come through on info today and we'll see Harry Byrne's face popping up. But in this window, he hasn't been in. Harry Byrne was in, I think, as a development player during last year's Six Nations. He was in as a development player again at the start of the last, the kind of restart window. And then he was a full member of the squad for the last week of the November camps, December, before that Scotland game. I think he may have been involved in one of the kind of match day preps. So he probably was a 24th, 25th man, down there. So he has that little bit of experience. And then he got injured. I think if he'd started that game against Northampton and had gone well for him, he'd be in now and he'd be contending. I think he may have leapfrogged his brother at that stage, but unfortunately he pulled the back muscle, I think it was, in the warm-up, missed that. And then we had this weird January where the games were all cancelled and he wasn't selected for the Munster game because they needed to get minutes into Johnny, I think. And yeah, they needed to get minutes into Johnny and Ross Byrne is obviously part of the equation as well. And that was their only game really of any consequence between the first week of January and the Six Nations. So there has been a bit of a difficulty for Andy Farrell there in that he hasn't really been playing. And then he came back and played in that game against the Scarlets before the Six Nations, which was an outstanding performance from him and Kieran Frawley, who I really like as well. But, there is a leap between Pro 14 rugby and Six Nations rugby, and it's quite substantial. At the same time, there's sometimes they've got to take that a bit of a leap of faith. They've got to go, right, this is our fella. You don't want to damage him either if he makes that mistake or if he makes those couple of mistakes a la Harry Byrne. Do we risk burning through these guys and then ending up coming back to Sexton because no one else has been able to do it? That I'm sure in Farrell's mind that's part of it, and also in Farrell's mind is the fact that once Ireland had a few wobblies in the autumn, he came under an awful lot of heat, particularly after that Georgia game, which is understandable. So he's balancing off an awful lot, but it's nothing compared to the fear that it's all going to happen again in France in 2023. Yeah. That's got to be that has to be underpinning everything we do at the moment, in my opinion.
Well, I would agree with you. The one thing I think is that, and Brian O'Driscoll pointed this out pre-tournament, that this is the campaign where after this campaign it gets too late to sack your head coach. So make it through this point, and it's kind of you got to dance with the one who brung you. From the IRFU's perspective, that it'll be full bore, full commitment, that's it. And so these games actually take on more of a life of their own. Perform well in this tournament and everybody goes, okay, you now have the freedom to experiment all you want. And at that point you would expect next year we're not seeing the scenario we're seeing at the moment. But just at the minute, the prize money from the IRFU's perspective and the job security from the head coach's perspective, you would suspect are driving Andy Farrell's thought processes.
Yeah, I can't see them getting rid of Andy Farrell, partly because of COVID and the financial situation, partly because unless David Nucifora suddenly feels accountable to someone, because at the moment he's not really accountable to anyone, and he makes his own decisions, and Farrell is his man, and I don't see it personally. I think that they've backed him, and they'll probably see it through with him unless things go horrendously wrong. And I don't see, like, based on last Sunday, I don't see that. I thought there was a lot of progress in the performance. You know, they effectively won the game with 14 men. They scored a point more than Wales over that period, which shows that the players are playing for the coach. But no, like Brian is right, and it's a valid point. And Andy Farrell maybe doesn't. Maybe if I might feel that his job is secure, but maybe he feels differently. And you know, obviously he's a perception thing to manage. But there's no fans in stadiums. The RFU are not reliant on gate income at the moment. There's no prospect of fans being in a stadium for the foreseeable future. Like there's no. I don't know if their income's going to take a hit as a result of the way the results are going. Apart from prize money, obviously there's a difference. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head between finishing 5th and finishing 2nd. But they do want to be competitive in this tournament. But they got to try. It's about finding a way to stay competitive while finding new blood. And it's a crude comparison with France, because France won 2 junior World Cups and have an incredible generation coming through. But France have managed to introduce new blood while remaining highly competitive, and are now the favourites to win the whole thing. So there is a way. Our generation of players is good. I don't know if it's as good as the French one, and they're not getting a massive amount of senior rugby right now. But there is. I don't think this calls for widespread change. And like Andy Dunn has outlined, how if you switch to 9, if you switch your focus to 9, you put a bit more emphasis on Murray, it might not be as high pressure to put a 10 in there. That the 10 doesn't need to be the complete game runner in the way Johnny Sexton has been. So there are tricks that they can play to try and ease the burden on that 10, whoever it is. But if we take it as, it's not a given that Johnny's not going to play this weekend, but there's a good chance that the way he came off, that he might not be right for this weekend. I think it's fair to say. So there's a choice to be made this weekend, for sure. And if that player does well, you've got Italy next. So do you give Johnny an extended break, and do you use that to maybe start Ross Byrne and bring Harry off the bench, or Billy Burns and bring Harry off the bench, and you start bringing Jack Crowley into your camp, because he's the guy that, you know, if O'Gara thinks he's good enough to play for La Rochelle, then he's probably good enough to play for Ireland in the not too distant future. So like these are conversations that have to be had. But like, at the same time, you want to win this. You want to be competitive, so you want to beat France. And I can understand Andy Farrell's part that part of that thinking. £2
million difference between finishing 2nd and 5th. 2 million sterling. So
that's four central contracts for a year effectively. So I mean that's not to be sniffed at.
If we assume Sexton is out for this weekend, is it Ross Byrne that starts, and then who comes in for Peter O'Mahony as well?
I wouldn't take it as a given. Andy Farrell, I think, because he's a player's coach, and he spent his entire life in dressing rooms, having come through at 16 in Wigan. I wonder if Andy Farrell is the kind of coach that puts his arm around Billy Burns and says, "You screwed up, go and make up for it this weekend." Probably makes more sense from a strategic point of view to start with Ross and bring Billy on, because I think Ross is the kind of more controlling 10 who can do what Johnny Sexton does, and Billy Burns has the more kind of like, has that game changing. I mean, his cross kick went awry, but he is a very good cross kicker of the ball. I know Ross Byrne is as well, but I think him and Gibson Park coming on give you a change of pace. So I've a sneaking suspicion he might go with Billy Burns, just because it's not because he's second choice, and that's the obvious thing to do, is that you move him up one, but also because you back. I think Farrell's the kind of guy who backs his players, and even if you've screwed up, you get another chance. I'm not sure. I would pick Rhys Ruddock. I think, you've lost an experienced soldier. Mahoney. Ruddock has an awful lot of experience in leadership as well. He's in incredible form. Gavin Coombs has been brilliant for Munster, but he's only been in the camp a week. He wasn't called up to the initial squad. I think Ruddock gives you a lot of what Coombs gives you, but he has that leadership and experience. And we don't know how long Mahoney is going to be out for, but I think this is a real opportunity. Ruddock's never started the Six Nations game, to my knowledge, which is incredible given he's 30 or 31, and he's a really, really good player. This is a real chance for him to nail down a place.
Is there any talk of Ryan Baird getting in the squad, or is he injured at the moment, or what's the crack with him?
He's in there. He was brought in once Caelan Doris and Quinn Rue left the squad last week with their injuries. Ryan Baird and Gavin Coombs were brought in. But Baird did have a bit of a drop-off after that initial burst. I mean, he played up in Ulster for Leinster A 2 or 3 weeks ago. And again, it was at 3 o'clock on a Friday. There was a couple of diehards watching, and he wasn't very, he didn't stand out in that company.
Right.
I think he has had a bit of a drop-off in form. So I think the second row, like, James Ryan might not play this weekend, so maybe there's a window for him to come in. But Ultan Dallant's in very good form, and he's still a reasonably young man. So you could start with Ty Byrne and Henderson with Ultan Dallant coming off the bench, or you could switch Byrne to 6 if James Ryan is fit, because Henderson played very well. So he has a couple of options. Baird is definitely international standard, but he's had a bit of a drop off. So I wonder if maybe just kind of coming through and playing those Saracens games and those big games, first of all, has just taken a little bit of a toll. So his form has dipped, and maybe he's not, I'm not sure if putting him in right now is the right call given his form.
Okay. What do you expect in terms of a kick from Ireland this weekend? Because obviously it will be a back to the wall performance.
Well, like, a lot depends on the personnel. Like, it's so hard to judge what happened on Saturday, because, like, if they can keep 15 men on the pitch for a start, it'd be a good thing. So I think a lot of what they showed with 14 men was really encouraging. The way they kept the ball against Wales, the way they probed the line. I think with the 15, the full complement on the pitch, they would, I think they would have won that game. So if they can keep a lot of that together, if they can bring that level of intensity, if they can, bring that bench on, if they can keep the game tight and bring that bench on, it will live with like, the bench in many ways lost the game for Ireland and Paris back in October. It just wasn't of the calibre that you need to beat a team like France. Whereas this now, with even with the injuries, I think they've got a really strong bench. They just need to stop making mistakes. If they make the same level of mistakes, if the senior guys make the same level of mistakes this week, they'll probably lose, because France will punish them. France have that ability to turn a mistake into a try very, very easily. But they have a week to fix that. They've got their backs to the wall. I would expect a performance. And while France were incredible at the weekend, Italy were horrendous. I think Ireland will ask them much tougher questions, both in attack and defence. Will they win? I think it's 50-50. France are probably slight favourites at this stage, particularly when you've taken away the experience of Sexton if he's not there. And, James Ryan was incredible for that 25 minutes that he was on. But I wouldn't rule an Irish win out, particularly given the stakes. And given, France went to Murrayfield around the same stage last year and were really, really poor. So they're not. It's not impossible that they could kind of float into Dublin on a high and not see it coming. So. Ireland can win. Will they win? I wouldn't be so sure.
Rory, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers. Have a good morning.
Rory O'Connor giving us some thoughts there from the Irish Independent. If you want to get in touch, 0879 180 180 is the number. Who would you pick at 10 for Ireland? We'd love to hear from you this morning. You can leave a comment there on the YouTube channel as well. We'll get to them in just a little while. 13 minutes past 8. Plenty more to come on OTB AM. Football with Daniel Harris after 9 o'clock. More rugby with Eimear Considine. Up next, we're talking to Nicola Tallant about Daniel Kinahan's role in boxing.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
This is OTB Sports Radio.
For Brady in American football, it is incredibly specific, and very, very few people get to hit him. He should be in an armchair ride. He runs on, he runs off. It's about having a really good arm. Rugby is multidiscipline. They call him a quarterback. That's lazy journalism in my view. Johnny is our best out-half.
Off the Ball, Saturdays from 1 on OTB Sports Radio. Listen live on the OTB Sports app.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, browse through dozens of new player markets, all powered by Opta. Shots on target, left foot, right foot, headed goals, assists and more. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
Calling all builders, joiners, plasterers and dryliners. Need advice on the right materials for the job? Consider it done. You need them on site and in your hand. Consider it done. You want access to over 10,000 products from the leading construction brands without having to start up the van. Consider it done. There's another way of doing things. eTag. We talk with you to solve your problem and deliver what you need directly onto site. No second guessing, no seconds wasted. Click etag.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
15 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM. Nicola Tallant, the Sunday World's investigations editor, is going to join us next. First, let's bring you quickly through Tuesday's sports pages. We can start with otbsports.com. Brian O'Driscoll on Billy Burns. Enough cameos, choose a 10. That was on last night's rugby, and you can hear that a little bit later on. Paul Mescal no longer training with MTK Gym in Australia. Nick Kyrgios continues war of words with strange Djokovic. He's in hiding. The reality of the Daniel Kinahan statement. That's from Kieran Cunningham on the show last night. And I'm going to run you through the back and the front pages. The front page of the Irish Sun, Desperate Dan, Kinahan mob boss bleats God and love on his side. Victims of feud, blast bid to polish image a disgrace. Kinahan, I haven't gone away, is the front of the Herald. Leo, kick Kinahan out of boxing. That's Varadkar, saying that he hates criminality being associated with sport. The front of the Star, the Codfather. Mob boss claims he's just a working class boy, and Mescal quits Oz Film Gym over gang boss links. So that's the front pages of the newspapers this morning. We'll get to the back pages a little bit later on. I'm delighted to say Nicola Tallant, the Sunday World Investigations editor and host of the Crime World podcast, is with us. Nicola, good morning to you again. How are you?
Good morning. I'm just looking at the front pages there myself. The Codfather has been used a few times, still nonetheless a good headline.
Hey, always play the hits, isn't that the sub editor's rules?
Absolutely.
Look, there's lots to get into, and we talked a little bit about the statement earlier on. Can I ask you, just from a kind of macro perspective, what's the point of issuing a statement to talk sport if you're Daniel Kinahan? What's the audience for that? Who's he attempting to talk to in that? I can't kind of work that bit out.
It's hard to work quite a lot of it out, to be honest with you, because you're trying to apply your own logic to somebody who's behaving illogically. Talk sport, look, I imagine that Daniel Kinahan was only going to release that statement to a broadcaster who were going to agree to run it in full, uninterrupted, unchallenged, and allow it flow from start to finish, which I do think a lot of broadcasters would not have agreed to. They would have maybe, suggested that they would, of course, have a statement, but be able to challenge it. I mean, that seemed to be on his, rules. I think that went yesterday. Now, they did have a journalist on in the aftermath who commented on it, but it was a very lengthy statement to run from start to finish. And from somebody who is suspected of such crimes, it's quite extraordinary, really.
The audience isn't Ireland, right? Because everybody in Ireland is relatively familiar with the story. You would think, maybe notwithstanding Paul Mescal training in that gym in Australia. Is the audience is it a UK audience?
Talk Sport is definitely a UK audience, and as far as I know, they do have a big audience in Spain, in the expat community. I think they nearly have, and I could be wrong here, but I think they have a studio out in Spain. So that audience is, and it's obviously for sports fans. So that's really what he's trying to hit. He doesn't really care about the audience. He doesn't want to come on a show that might challenge the allegations of criminality around him. He just wants to basically say to sports, I'm here and I'm here to stay, to the boxing world, just because these pesky shows like Panorama on the BBC and the Irish media say these things about me. I ain't going anywhere, and I'm still in the background arranging these fights. I mean, that to me yesterday was the one thing that could cause problems and was probably ill-advised on his behalf. He's really put the ball into the court of Sky Sports and BT Sports there by suggesting that, or saying outright, that he's still very much involved in organising those big events.
Yeah, because that does kind of ramp up the pressure on the sports broadcasters. This seems like there's kind of a pattern where there's a PR surge, and then there's a bunch of boxers come out and back Daniel Kinahan and talk about their personal experience with him. So yesterday, Amir Khan, very, very famous boxer over the last 2 decades and involved in boxing regulation, came out and said he was the nicest man he'd ever met. It does seem as if this is the important, that's the court of public opinion that Daniel Kinahan is courting with these pronouncements, and it's like shoring up your base essentially in political terms.
Yes, and you know, if you look at it, a lot of the boxers that support him have these very personal stories that are linked to him. You know, Tyson Fury, Ben Davison has come out and said where he was when Daniel Kinahan plucked him from the scrap heap and funded him to greatness. There's no doubt. I mean, he's made an incredible comeback. You've Peter McDonough there, who speaks about Daniel Kinahan saving his life. They've very personal experiences with him, a lot of these boxers, even though he's not part of MTK, we're told, where they have been signed to. It's an absolute pattern. And from the beginning, from the setup, the establishment of that then MGM gym in Marbella, where it all started. And I recall when we went out there to Spain, we were actually covering a story on the Kinahan organisation and discovered that gym. Myself and a colleague had gone out, and I just remember looking into it. It's down a kind of a hill, down into a basement car park thing, and wondering, was this a hobby or was there something more to it? What exactly was it? We didn't quite understand what it was. Daniel Kinahan was dealing with the builders, and there was lots of talk about it. There was pages in the society pages in Marbella about the opening of it. And as we kind of continued to monitor it, what I did notice was from the very early days, MGM, which is now MTK, courted celebrity, which is a well-worn sort of business model to success, you know. I mean, it's why all these businesses send their products to, you know, Instagrammers and TikTokers and this sort of thing. But yeah, there was a stream of celebrities would have gone into the gym. I don't think most of them knew what was going on. They'd go in, they'd be photographed in it, similar to exactly what happened to the actor there yesterday, Paul Mescal. So there's this sort of element of courting celebrity, and that brings you credibility. And actually, if you go way back to Sammy the Bull Gravano's testimony to the US Senate, when he was quizzed about, he was a big mafiosa who gave evidence against John Gotti and others. And he was questioned about the mafia's links to boxing many years ago, in the early 90s. And he discussed how they had gone into it to do exactly that. So if there was any questions asked, that there would be, you know, big celebrities, if they had to go to court, big celebrities would attend, would give them character references, that they would be friends with these people. He even spoke about how, you know, the mafia talked about getting close to Donald Trump at the time, and others who owned hotels. So it's a well-worn thing. Some of them are, the boxers haven't educated themselves about the background of Daniel Kinahan. Others don't care because the money is coming in, and they feel they have to back him no matter what.
That was interesting. I didn't know about the Gotti, Johnny the Bull. What was the surname?
Sammy the Bull Gravano. And actually, the for anybody interested, those Senate hearings are online. They're on YouTube, and you can see him give his testimony to the US Senate. They had become concerned about the links between the mafia and boxing at the time. He actually talks about how they had targeted a sort of down on his luck boxer, the mafia, and that they had brought him in to and backed him to fight. Now, in those cases, they were either backing them to lose or backing them to win. So there was betting syndicate on in the background as well. But it is very interesting. It's interesting to look at it and to compare maybe what's going on now.
Well, I think that is kind of one of the key things here, actually, that the lessons of history are fertile ground for us to kind of learn about what's happening in all aspects of society, if you think about it. But because one of the defences that people put up is like, well, sure, the mafia have always been involved in boxing. What's the big deal? But the reason why the mafia got involved in boxing wasn't just because they liked the fights and they liked the fighters. It was because it was unbelievably useful. It's a lawless, largely unregulated society. You're dealing with massive sums of money that you can amass in quite a short period of time. You can fix the results if you need to, and there's all sorts of other reasons why historically the Italian mafia in New York and all the way back to Murder Inc. would have been getting involved in boxing at that point. It's the perfect business and
most
sport.
Definitely. I mean, they got involved in construction in New York as well, but all to launder money. I mean, they were laundering money through it. Gravano talks about, I actually wrote about this in a booklet I did for the Sunday World a couple of months ago, maybe it was last year now, Off the Ropes. And he also spoke about how they would get into gyms. He went down to Brooklyn to look at this particular gym to buy it, and the plan was they were going to buy the gym and they'd be able to launder a lot of funds through coaches, merchandise, and all the other things that go with it. So, yeah, it's certainly anybody who's a bit train spotter about all this might find his videos interesting.
Right, we'll definitely try and dig them out. Nicola, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the other kind of aspect of this, where Kinahan keeps talking about not being convicted and there have been no convictions. In a way, was Daniel Kinahan being in the United Arab Emirates, did it kind of suit the legal authorities a little bit, because it was out of sight, out of mind? Is this boxing actually refocusing attention in Ireland on that criminal investigation? Had that trail gone cold in any way? Is there also an element of this that might backfire on that level?
No, the trail hasn't gone cold at all. I mean, the plan here in Ireland and the plan rather to take down the criminal organisation that is the Kinahan Organised Crime Group has gone ahead as planned from the beginning. It was a 5-year plan. Obviously, the situation in the last year with COVID has delayed plenty of things across the world. But the fact of the matter is that plan is ongoing, and there is no question that there's anyone being forgotten. In actual fact, I would say that you're into the final takedown, which would be the management structure there, really, So there's no question. This boxing thing has always gone on as a different trajectory. It's nothing to do with policing. I find it quite amazing that a lot of the boxing, was it the television companies or Eddie Hearn and that are saying, oh, this is nothing to do with us, it's to do with the guards, or it's to do the UK police. Like, the fact of the matter is MTK's headquarters are in the United Arab Emirates. Around 2016, when the Spanish police moved in to arrest a guy called James Quinn, who was subsequently convicted of the murder of Gary Hutch, they also raided MGM Gym in Marbella at that point. But just shortly before that, that was September of 2016, MGM had restructured financially, and they had moved what they call their intellectual rights out to the United Arab Emirates. I was trying to follow it as much as I could, but the trail ran dry there, because they moved it to a place called Ras Al Khaimah, which is a free trade zone, and there's no company records. You can't get at anything there. So that is a business that's operating. Obviously, MTK have no gyms here in Ireland, and they aren't operating here in Ireland. So as a result, there's no way the Irish authorities can go after. I mean, the Irish authorities, and certainly the Gardaí, cannot sort of troop into the Emirates and start investigating the finances of a company that's in existence there. So it's all a bit naive, or else it's for them to say, oh, the guards should be investigating this, it's just very uneducated at the very least. Perhaps they're just deflecting, and trying to kick the ball into someone else's court. It's boxing that should be looking at it. It's boxing that should be examining it and questioning who they're doing financial deals with. End of. The criminal end of it will be looked after by the policing authorities and is being. But the boxing end of it, that just seems to be this unregulated, lawless world from my eyes. But I don't know a huge amount about sport, but from where I'm sitting, it looks to be like the Wild West.
Over the course of the past week, Nicola, since the airing of the Panorama documentary, there's been a fairly grim story about a journalist or a number of journalists involved in the production who've had threats made against them. Is this commonplace when covering this story, when covering Daniel Kinahan?
It's not commonplace, but there have been threats made to journalists, there's no doubt about it. They've been linked to the Kinahan organised crime group, of which he is the head of. He stated yesterday that he seemed to be absolutely abhorred that it would be suggested that he would make threats against journalists, that he believes in journalism, the freedom of speech, all the rest of it. The fact of the matter is that he believes in the kind of journalism that allows him an uninterrupted, which he gave yesterday, that he's not questioned, he's not criticised, and, he's allowed rewrite the course of history, which is what he did in that statement yesterday. I mean, there's many parts of it that were pretty jaw-dropping. Obviously, the claims about journalists were one, and the other thing was really this whole picture he created of this working class guy, him, who grew up in poverty in Dublin and really made good and had worked so hard in boxing, and it was his passion and his prowess as a businessman that had got him to where he had got to. There's no mention of the fact that his father created an Irish mafia on drugs and guns, and that he took over the running of it around 2014, and the direction of it. There was just a complete and utter, he rewrote history there,
That
rags to riches story, is that something that really hits home quite a lot when it comes to boxing circles? Like, is it working, I guess, basically outside of Ireland?
Well, that's the first time I have to say I've heard that, but we haven't heard too much from Daniel Kinahan over the years anyway. He's just having a bit of a furore of publicity at the moment. That's the second statement, by the way, he's issued. You have to remember he issued a previous statement to the Irish Independent, which I don't believe had the effects he thought it was going to have. I think he thinks when he speaks that everybody should just accept what he's saying, and everyone should just see it the way he sees it. But, he hasn't been somebody that has, despite his lofty heights in the boxing world, he hasn't been somebody that has spoken out before. So I hadn't realised he had that idea of himself, to be honest with you, as being impoverished. I mean, I don't think he would have had, in his living memory, ever felt what poverty is. His father was a major drug trafficker by the time he was just a teenager. I mean, his father has convictions for heroin trafficking and was probably, took over actually the heroin market after Larry Dunn was jailed. Larry Dunn being the original godfather of crime here in Ireland. And his father was in and out of jails throughout Europe for money laundering and various other crimes, while building essentially that Irish mafia in Spain. So Daniel Kinahan was, he grew up in Tala and later in Oliver Bond, but he very quickly sort of used the family name to build up a mob around him. And by his early 20s, he's featured in the UK in a horse racing fixing trial. He's named in that, where allegations were that the jockey Kieran Fallon was being strong-armed to lose races. And, we follow him on in his 20s to Spain, where he lives in mansions fit for millionaires and like the rest of them, drives different expensive cars every day. So I don't know where the poverty bit is coming from with him. The community that he lived in, that he grew up in, is impoverished, and worse so because of the actions of him and his mob.
Nicola, there's photographs in the paper of the arrest in Spain. Where did that case go? How did that not end up reaching the conclusion that many people thought it would have reached?
This was Operation Shovel in 2010.
What happened there?
Yeah, so what happened there was that was a massive big operation that involved UK, Irish police, Belgians. There was investigation into money laundering, into weapons smuggling, into drug trafficking. The Kinahan gang were targeted. The Spanish system is extremely slow. There's many reasons, by the way, criminals live in Spain. en masse on the Costa del Sol, and the justice system, for those reasons. When police investigate, they hand over all their files to a magistrate, who then investigates. That can go on for 4 years. So they were all put into custody. The lawyers got them bail. They got out, and the investigation chugged along. Now, bit by bit, all of the charges were dropped until they ended up 10 years into it last year, with a couple of sort of Mickey Mouse charges left on a few individuals. But the main things were dropped. Now, it's complex, but a number of reasons pointed to. One is there is suspicion that the Kinahan organised crime group were paying 2 police officers on the Costa. I have no reason to disbelieve that. I have, there is evidence from previous investigations in Belgium that Christy Kinahan was paying police officers for information. And in fact, that was before the courts there. That was one of the reasons. The second reason would be that the Spanish system just wasn't able for a big investigation like that. And thirdly, it's often been said there was a meeting held before the raids in May of 2010, and there was up to 300 officers briefed on what was going to happen from all the different territories that were involved. And I know here that the Irish Gardaí were very, very wary when that happened, because any raids on a criminal organisation, especially a very rich one, most of the guards that are kicking in the doors don't even know who's on the other side. Yeah. But, you know, on the morning of it. So this absolutely, it is a no to brief that many people, because it allows them time to, you know, to move stuff and to shift stuff. The suspicions that they left particular stuff to be found. There was a lot of information found about Brazilian property sites, which tied the authorities up in knots for years, because they get documents from Brazil, and when they came to it, it was a ball of smoke. There was nothing there. They thought they were going after all this land, but...
Nicola, last question for you then. What do you think is what happens next? I mean, I know you say it's for boxing to sort out. Like, we could be waiting a long time before boxing cares about anything other than making money. So, do you expect anything? Is there anything that you think will happen? Will this barrage of publicity continue? Is that now the kind of this is the era that we're in?
Well, I don't know what will happen next, because he is behaving very unpredictably, Daniel Kinahan. I mean, you wouldn't have necessarily thought that he was going to release that statement yesterday. I mean, if I was a PR person working for the mob, I probably would have told him to keep his head down after that panorama and to try and put out a few fires. I have no idea. Are sponsors pulling out? Are people moving away from him? Is he being seen as... He should be, but, you know, it remains to be seen. The boxing community seems to be very tight, and it seems to be all focused on these 2 big fights, Billy Joe Saunders and Can in May, and then Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, whenever that does happen. There's an awful lot of money running up, so they will just try and, you know, keep going to those ends.
Nicola, great to have you with us. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
It's Nicola Tallant there, the Sunday World Investigations editor and host of the Crime World podcast. I'm just going to read this. Daniel Kinahan, who's been identified in the High Court in Dublin as a senior figure in organised crime on a global scale, has said he is not part of a criminal gang in Ireland or anywhere in the world. He has never contested the findings of fact made against him in the Irish courts. It is 8:39 this morning here on OTB AM. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with John Duggan.
I would think so. You know, I'm a huge Keith Earls fan. I played with him for a number of years, and always I've had huge respect for him. But it certainly wasn't his best outing in an Irish jersey. He never properly got going. He looked a small bit tentative on that drop ball. The Rees-Zammit try was the one that the possession that Wales got came from his error, where we won a line out against the head, and he kicked it direct into touch, having been taken over our 22. So, you know, there are little X's against Keith Earls' name. Sometimes the game goes for you, other times it doesn't. And it just wasn't his game. And I'm not surprised that Larmour came on for a little bit of spark. He looked very sharp. and looked as though he could create real problems with his footwork. So I'd anticipate, I'd be surprised to see the same back three again when you have two wingers that, have had some good moments, but, some pretty average moments as well. And you've got the quality of Larmour and other wingers, waiting in the wings. You'd have to anticipate that there's a chance of some change in that back three, all right. I'm not sure what it is yet. Keith Earls has got a lot of credit in the bank with some of his performances. James Lowe is new to the setup, but you would think that with what Larmour can bring and the X factor that perhaps at times we're missing this weekend, you got to get those guys on the park. And Larmour's definitely very exciting going forward. Again, not much asked of him going back, but I think he's very likely to be a starter this weekend.
All right, it's 8:41. We'll bring you more of that interview with Brian O'Driscoll just around about 9:30 this morning. Now, John Duggan is with us. John, good morning to you. How are you?
Kieran, Owen, how are things?
Yeah, good. Where are we starting?
Just on that, Rhys Ruddock could be in line for a call to the Ireland 15 for the weekend Six Nations match against France, Valentine's Day in Dublin. Peter Mahoney set for a band hearing tomorrow. Johnny Sexton and James Ryan following the return to play protocols after receiving knocks to the head in Cardiff. So that's where we are rugby-wise at the moment after the disappointing defeat to Wales on Sunday. Leeds United moving into the top half of the Premier League table last night. Goals from Jack Harrison and Patrick Bamford in a 2-0 win over Crystal Palace. So Leeds 10th in the table now. FA Cup matches tonight, the magic of the Cup. Burnley, Bournemouth at Turf Moor at 5:30. Then Man United welcoming David Moyes back to Old Trafford for a 7:30 kick-off against West Ham. Paul Pogba out. He's got a thigh injury, so he's going to be out for a few weeks. Thomas Souček is available after that red card was overturned that he received last weekend. Last time West Ham won at Old Trafford, 2017. Henderson's going to play in goal for Man United tonight. Jurgen Klopp, I was watching this yesterday on Twitter, this exchange he had with an Israeli TV reporter, Niv Dovrat, after the 4-1 thumping by Manchester City. Klopp getting especially narky.
City have got a game in hand. It's obviously 10 points gap now. Can you see any scenario of catching up with them, or is it just for Liverpool now fighting for the top four?
I really think you should to prepare your job a little bit better, to be honest. Just how can you ask after they are 13 points away, in my understanding? And this question about becoming champion, how can you, do you really think that's an appropriate question in the moment? You have only two questions and you waste one for that.
No,
your fault.
The second one was about possibly fighting for the top four.
You had only two questions.
So is it mainly about the top four?
You had only two questions. The second one was you wasted it. No, I think they run away. Yeah.
My second part of the question was about if you think now it's mainly about focusing on the top four for Liverpool after tonight's performance. That was the second part.
Yeah, that's obvious. We try to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is not what we've come to expect from Jurgen Klopp. We'd rightly call out Alex Ferguson or Jose Mourinho if they engaged in that behaviour with the reporter, and I thought it was poor form, lads.
The audio doesn't sound as bad as the video, because in the video, the video actually makes it look much worse. In the audio, it kind of sounds like he's, somehow it's sotto voce and it's kind of, there's like a bit of coaching going on, but actually it's not. It's threatening and it's nasty and it's I mean, this is obviously his type A personality when life is good, is this kind of megawatt smile and it's brilliant and the whole room lights up. But when it's the other side, it's like, wow, this is quite the insight here.
Well, there's two things about this. He wouldn't have done that to Jeff Shreves. And I watched the Shreves interview this morning. He wouldn't have taken that tone with Jeff Shreves. That's the first thing of Sky. Secondly, this Israeli TV station is probably paying an absolute fortune for the rights. The guy's just doing his job. So there's a difference there. And thirdly, I was on Twitter last night just saying it was poor form, which it is. And then you have all the Liverpool fans going, the guy's asking stupid questions. You didn't say anything about Mourinho, and I said, well, Mourinho was way out of line with that lady last week, and it's funny, so you got Klopp being out of line, and you got supporters of the club then rallying around somebody who's been out of line, which just seems to be utterly bizarre to me.
I think he would 100% do it to Jeff Shreves. I think Jeff Shreves and Jurgen Klopp has turned into Tony O'Donoghue and Martin O'Neill.
No, I don't agree. I watched the interview, and he did say, well, by the look in your face, you think so. But he wouldn't have acted he wouldn't have shut down Jeff Shreves and said, "You got 2 questions. That was a silly question," and given up 1-line answers. I doubt it.
I presume the Israeli guy had been told. So look, again, I don't know, but I presume the press officer goes 2 questions, and he hears that, and your man asks his 2 questions, one rolling into the other one, and that's when that 2 questions thing. So he can't shut down Jeff Shreves either, because you can't. Sky have paid billions and they've made him rich. So that would be like, you can't do that. That's the gig, right?
Yeah. But so there's the difference, which I don't think is right.
No, it's shocking. It's not shocking, but it's really, really bad form, and it kind of it's how people treat the people that they meet that you begin to see, like, and it sounds terrible, but how you treat the lowest of the people in the day, that however that phrase is, like how you deal with those people is a signifier of your internal character. And he revealed a little bit of his character there, and it's not very pleasant.
Yeah, and speaking of all of that, Amir Khan, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter last night. He's a former Olympic silver medal winner and professional world champion, also the Middle East president of the World Boxing Council. This is by Daniel Kinahan. So Daniel Kinahan, as we know, made that statement to TalkSport yesterday, that English broadcaster. I'm just going to read out some of what Daniel Kinahan said in that statement. I'm blessed to work in boxing at the highest level, having organised some of the biggest fights in boxing previously. And in the future, I will continue working every day to bring out the best in and look after the boxers I'm lucky enough to work with. So he's still involved in the game. I can't be clearer on the fundamental stir. I'm not part of a criminal gang or any conspiracy. I have no convictions. Daniel Kinahan was named in the Irish High Court in 2018 as a senior figure in organised crime on an international scale. Amir Khan's tweet in the last 24 hours, I've known Daniel for some time. I've huge respect for what he's doing for boxing. We need people like Dan to keep the sport alive. One of the nicest guys I've met.
It's like the opposite of what people thought would happen with people coming out from boxing and saying, "Oh, actually, we need to get control of our sport back." That's not happening. Like, boxing doesn't exist as a thing. It's like it's a million different organisers and
there's no federation,
and governing bodies and look, the amateur federation that does exist, like, you should read about that. Very similar issues in amateur boxing, where there is a federation as there are in professional boxing, almost exactly the same issues. And I don't see the sport being able to save itself or being able to help itself from outside influence. It's not going to happen. So that leaves essentially the broadcasters. And are all the broadcasters going to agree to turn their backs on the money, or will one broadcaster decide that they're going to make so much money that they're going to keep going?
Well, nothing will change until money talks, as you say there. And I think only things are going to make a change are political and financial pressure on the broadcasters. I don't think you're going to have enough people saying, off the basis of saying, watching BBC Panorama, oh, you know what, I don't like what I see. Out of a moral principle, I'm not going to subscribe to Tyson Fury, an MTK boxer, versus Anthony Joshua, the world heavyweight. There will not be enough people taking that stance.
No.
People will still want to watch it.
No, they absolutely
won't. People will still subscribe just as much as people, as Philip was saying to me here today, will watch the Qatar World Cup. We'll be okay with the human rights issues, say, in the Middle East, which seems to be a real Wild West area in this situation where Daniel Kinahan is currently in Dubai. That will still, support Manchester City. So you're not going to have enough of them. So therefore, it has to be political or financial pressure on these TV companies, because that's the oxygen for this. And at the moment, until that changes, nothing's going to change here. And it is, as Kieran Cunningham said, last night on the show, quite depressing. Australian Open tennis is happening. And this is the week when nothing happens, really, isn't it? This is the week of first round whitewashes. Victoria Azarenka was beaten in straight sets by Jessica Pegula, so she is a former winner. But an easy win for Sofia Kenin, 7-5, 6-4. Rafa Nadal, 6-3, 6-4, 6-1. You always want a bit of trash talk and a bit of entertainment around the first week of a tennis tournament when there's nothing happening. And Nick Kyrgios gave us that. When he responded to Novak Djokovic, the world number one, saying that Kyrgios was somebody he didn't have any respect for off the court.
I was extremely careful about what I was doing. I didn't want to spread the virus to anyone. Now I'm actually trying to donate meal kits to people that need food. I have my foundation. So it's very strange to me, as why he would say he doesn't respect me off the court. I actually do a lot off the court. But yeah, he's a very strange cat, Novak is. Heck of a tennis player, but I unfortunately, as someone that's partying with his shirt off during a global pandemic, I don't know if I can take any slack from that, man. That's as bad as it gets for me.
This is like wrestling when it all flips halfway through, and Kyrgios is now the good guy, and Djokovic is the bad guy, and they come out of the whatever, and everybody's cheering on and that kind of stuff. And so who's gonna take the chair first and smash the other person over the head with the chair?
I'm on, for the first time in my life, I'm on Team Kyrgios.
Yeah, mad. Ask Colin Buhig. Colin Buhig will know all about this, but it's kind of funny. Now, that's what you have to deal with in the first week of a tennis Grand Slam these days.
The beef is real, I think it's fair to say. The beef is real.
Yeah, it is. And that kind of makes me want to have a hamburger, but it's $8.50.
That it, John?
That's it. It was disappointing at the weekend. Obviously, the Ireland match, once again, I was concerned by 2 months after the Steve Thompson thing broke, the amount of head injuries I saw on the pitch. There was 4 players I counted that went off. And I do think that, not now, but I do think rugby is facing an unexpected bill, not a financially necessary, but an injury bill in 20 years' time, and a real health issue bill for the way the game is at the moment. And I know we can talk as much about Billy Burns or Peter Mahoney and all these kind of things, but this to me is still the most glaring thing that I'm watching when I'm watching a rugby game at the moment. A game of collision, not evasion.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true, and it's certainly something that we're going to be talking about more and more as time goes on. Good stuff, John. Thanks very much for that.
All right, guys, take care.
It's 8:52. Let me tell you what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today. It's Quinny's How's the Head with Pat Short at noon. At 1 o'clock, it's OTB Gold. Jerry Eisenberg, the legendary boxing writer, talking about Muhammad Ali and covering Ali. Dadcast from 3. Mount Rushmore at 4 o'clock is County Fermanagh. Declan Bogue putting a dartist on. OTB Gold is Ronnie Delaney at 6. And then OTB Tonight, Armin Kettian on the Tiger Woods documentary. Dan McDonnell on the football show. And the Boston Globe's Tara Sullivan on the Super Bowl, which was more watched in Boston than it was in Tampa Bay, because that's the power of Tom Brady these days. A reminder, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good mornings. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Now, I'm delighted to say Irish and Munster rugby star Eimear Considine is with us, here to launch the Aviva Midi Rugby Virtual Skills Hub, which will take place over next week's midterm break from Monday the 15th to Friday the 19th of February 2021. Check out aviva.ie/safe to dream for more. Eimear, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks very much for having me on.
Before we get into you and the rugby, how's your sister getting on?
She got a bad knock at the weekend to her head, but she actually doesn't remember the bang, doesn't remember the game, doesn't remember much around what happened, but she just has a bad headache at the moment. So obviously just going to do her return to play protocol. I'm actually not sure what the AFL's protocol is with the time difference, and she's kind of been a bit sleepy and groggy. We haven't actually been chatting properly to her, so I don't think it's similar to what we have here, that she might be in with a chance of going back on at the weekend. And the fact that she still has headaches and symptoms means she probably won't be allowed to play anyway. Yeah, which I'm sure you're glad of from this distance. It's obviously always very hard when anybody you know and love ends up getting injured, but it's obviously all that more difficult when she's so far away. Yeah, I think Mam was watching the game and she was down for probably 2 minutes or so, but when someone close to you is down on the ground, like Mam said, it felt like a lifetime, but it actually wasn't that long. But yeah, she's in good hands over there. The fact that we've been over, we've met the girls, we've met the family she's staying with, I think that puts Mam's mind at ease a little bit, knowing that she's in really good care, and the Crows are a great club and they're all about family, and knowing that she hasn't got her family over there, they're all buying into it and helping her through it. So at least that's one thing for us. But yeah, it's never easy when someone's on the other side of the world and gets a knock.
What actually happened, Eimear, for people who didn't see the game?
So she was just on the run with the ball and someone came from behind her. And in rugby, that kind of a tackle is fine. You can just grab their legs or ankles. But what happened is in AFL, they try and wrap the ball, because if you have had an opportunity to release the ball and you get wrapped up, it's a turnover to the other team. So she actually got the ball away, but the girl never let her go. And actually, instead of falling the way she should have fallen, the girl, the Giants girl, fell on top of Ailish, but Eilish's hands were tied. So she literally just face planted on the ground with her own body, but also the impact of the Giants player on top of her. So she had like double the whammy fall on top of her head, and it was straight down her head because her hands were tied. So she had no way of supporting herself. So the girl actually has got a 1-match ban as a result of that.
Right. I think it's 12 days is the minimum protocol anyway, so she probably would have been missing next weekend. Fingers crossed the symptoms dissipate pretty quickly and she gets back fairly soon. Other than that, we've been talking to a bunch of the players who've gone out to play in the AFL, and they're all having the crack. It's been, I'd say, quite jealous-inducing for most people watching them have that normal lifestyle where they're out, no masks, and largely partying and having the crack.
Yeah, plus the weather, between the weather and all the fun they're having, it's really hard to wake up in the morning time and look at their Instagrams. But I think that was the one thing that Ailish found really difficult when she went over, because they're essentially treated like slaves. They were shipped from they're on a plane and then they're brought straight from the airport in with army guys in a bus, and they're very, very strict about it, and then they're shoved into the hotel rooms and not allowed outside for 14 days. So to go from that to walking outside the door and nobody wearing masks, nobody social distancing, no restrictions, crowds at games, it's bizarre. And she found it really hard to adjust at the start because she'd been here obviously through all the lockdowns. It didn't happen overnight. She still was a bit wary about, will I wear my mask, will I bring my mask, or I suppose it does. We've adjusted to it here, but it was strange for her at the start.
You played Gaelic games as a kid as well.
Yeah.
The crossover of ball skills and all that kind of stuff, did it help you as a rugby player? Did we just take that for granted, or was it actually something real that you experienced when you got serious about rugby?
No, I think the same as the AFL girls, the athleticism of Gaelic footballers is what stands out from the crowd with us. And I think the ability to be able to pick up a sport, we'll be able to try our hand at probably a lot of sports, but just to get good at them, I suppose, is the hard thing. And similar to what Ailish said, it wasn't the physical side of things that was difficult, and the same for me. It wasn't the physical side of the running and the catch pass, and the skills came easy to me, but it was the game understanding that was just so hard, because they're completely different games, and even going from 7s to 15s, they're completely different games as well. But I found the hardest challenge was the actual, wasn't the tackling, wasn't the passing, wasn't the rucking, because you were able to do them in isolation, and you're doing a drill, right? The aim of this drill is to pass. Great, easy. Put that into a game, and your decision making. It's the learning how to pass under pressure, or learning when to pass and what's the right time, and should I have passed or should I have carried? And it was the game understanding that I completely lacked in. I didn't understand, and obviously it's still a work in progress, but that was the hardest thing. And Ailish said the same thing when she got there, that things that she thinks, in Gaelic football, she'd automatically think to cross the ball, switch the play. In the AFL, they want you kicking it down the channel on top of the people that are there, and to Ailish, that's bizarre. She's kicking the ball away. It's a 50-50 ball, but in the AFL they want her doing that because I suppose it's less risky. So she's had to change her mindset as well, and bring the skills she has had from football, transfer them over, but also play a whole new ball game essentially, because the tactical side of things is completely different. Her first week training, I think the head guy of the Crows, Phil Harper, said to her, how did you find all that running? So obviously it was pre-season, and she said, it was the first time that I didn't have to think. Whereas the rest of the training session, your brain is just fried from trying to think of what's this drill, what's the aim of it, the skills here, where should I be, am I in the right position? Whereas when she just ran, you don't have to think about it. So she said the easiest part of this was actually doing all the conditioning, which I don't think anyone would actually usually say.
Go on, all that running is suddenly a release. Go on.
Well, I was just going to ask you, from your perspective, how did you manage to build up that game smarts? Is it just from practice? Is there a coach who can actually teach you very specific things? Can you watch tape? What worked for you personally?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think, you can see things in the game and you can see it happen in front of you, but until someone actually points it out and says, look, he did this or she did this, and this is why this happened, or that's why that break was made, or did you see the line that she ran there, and as a result of that, that's what happened, or I think you need to watch the footage, but you also need someone there to coach you and be in your ear and tell you, what's a better decision here, or look at a scenario and say, look, okay, what options does the player have here, A, B, and C, and I think that's the only way you're going to learn is by watching. Yes, playing helps, but you have to analyse footage and analyse other players and pick players out that are in your position and see what they do well. And that was key with me, was looking at players and seeing what they did well. And, I found at the very start of rugby, I wasn't sure how to get off my wing. Like I found that when I hang on my wing, I get the ball, but then I wasn't getting a lot of ball and I could go a game without touching the ball. So I watched clips of Keith Earls getting off his wing and popping up inside 10 and outside of 10 and in the back door and trying to figure out what he does, because he gets on the ball quite a lot for a winger off his wing. So little things like that, and that's what I'd be encouraging other people to do if they are, looking to improve their games.
What specifically was Keith Earls doing that impressed you?
It was just his work rate. It was, a lot of wingers will just stay on their wings and wait for everyone else to get the ball, but that gets boring, gets frustrating sometimes when the ball isn't coming out, depending on who you're playing against or what kind of defensive line speed a team has. Like, wingers mightn't get the ball. So it was just getting off, popping up after third, fourth phase when, 10, 20, 30 might be a bit, scattered, or they mightn't have a proper defensive line set, and spotting those little gaps, or even like a grubber in behind and chatting to the 10 or whoever is kicking the ball. It's just working off the ball to try and get your hands on the ball, and that was something that or even popping up a first receiver. Like, he pops up a first receiver quite a bit and gets in there. So those kind of things.
As you start to implement those into your game and you start to get your hands on the ball a bit more, when do you reach a point of comfort? You said it's still a work in progress, obviously, and I guess all good sports careers until the day you finish are always a work in progress. But when do you start to feel comfortable and I should be here and I'm doing the right things?
Yeah, I don't think you ever feel content as a player either. You're always pushing for more, like you said. There's always something new, or the game is always developed in a different way, or even, I don't know, like the last day James Lowe was used as a kicker, like kicking option as a winger, so it's a completely different role for a winger. So the roles are always evolving, in the game, and every day it's changing. But I don't know. I don't even know if I'm there yet, or but I suppose just
maybe a better question is, when do you start to enjoy it?
Yeah, I suppose my first season I was definitely learning, and that second season when I came back, and you just have to stand up, and then I think when you start doing things right, you start getting the backing of your teammates, and when your teammates back you, when your teammates are telling you to do this, and your teammates are telling you to take the ball on or get in that position, or the head coach is saying you get yourself into those positions, I think it gives you confidence too that they back you, and that you have the backing of your teammates, which always gives you a bit of confidence and spurs you on to do it again and again. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is that you have the backing of those key people on the team.
What are you looking for then if you take that conversation and you apply, say, to last Sunday when you're watching Keith Earls and you're watching James Lowe, and it comes to your analysis? What did they do well? What did they do not so well, for example, against Wales?
I think the one thing with Earlsy is you can always back his defence. I thought he had a quiet game, actually. There wasn't many gaps for wingers, but these days it's not about line breaks, really. Obviously, Robbie Henshaw was the exception there, but the defensive system is so good in games these days, or in teams these days, that it's about getting any bit of a gain line, any bit of an advantage to put the defensive line on the back foot. So I suppose, look, he carries well, he's always going to be safe, but he didn't get the opportunities to make the breaks that he usually does. But his defensive system you'll never see someone make a break down his wing. You'll never see someone, very rare, someone will score a try down his wing. He mightn't always make the tackles, but he's in the right place at the right time, and he can read the defence well, whether he needs to shoot on a player man and ball or whether he needs to wait for his inside support line. So I thought he would hit a quiet game. James Lowe, like I said, he's a great option. His left peg it has always been one of his strengths. And it was good to see him clear twice with his left. I think with Jacob Stockdale gone from 15 at the moment with his injury, or if you will, I don't know how his injury is, but at 15 you had that left option with Jacob there, and I think James Lowe was a good fit at the weekend to substitute that there with those two phenomenal clearance kicks, like the length he got off that boot. And like that's the stuff we see so often from James Lowe, even in open play, like his boot, whether it's a chip or a grubber through, you know, he's really powerful that way. So look, it's worth having someone on the field like him for that reason. But I thought the try, it was a tough one for him as a winger. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't there. If you shoot and get the ball, and man, you're a hero and you know you've saved a try. If you shoot and don't get the ball and it's a try, you're the worst in the world. But equally, if you go soft on your 5 metre line defensively, someone's going to get over the line. So you probably could have read that a little bit better, maybe left it or else just got man and ball. But I think overall, like, he's really coming on and it's good to see. He's a different type of player to Earlsey. Earlsey and Jordan Larmour, they're kind of similar in that they dance around players, whereas James Lowe is like that strong ball carrier who kind of has a bit of X factor. You don't really know what you're going to get with him because he could chip and chase, he could mill someone over twice his size. So he's exciting on attack for sure. And I thought the man of the moment was Hugo Keenan in the back three. He was phenomenal. He just didn't make any mistakes. And as a fullback, you know, you're not looking for that X factor all the time, but he just didn't make mistakes. And safe hands, safe house back there is something that you need. And sometimes you take it for granted just how safe, even like Rob Kearney, how he just did the basics right. And Hugo is really, really filling those shoes well and really coming into that position. And I think has the jersey nailed down for the moment anyway.
It's remarkable the lack of a GAA background in that back three is striking, and surely something you'd use as a black mark against it.
Usually, yeah. Some commentators have to mention their GAA skills for some sort of a catch they make.
It's interesting that you mentioned that about Keenan, that he just does the right things all the time. And I think that was probably one of the things that we maybe didn't appreciate too much with Rob Kearney, that he just did his job all the time, which is a really difficult thing at test level, to be doing the right thing every single week.
I think that was the one thing that people noticed when Rob went. Like, obviously Hugo has found his feet at the moment, but there was a gap there where we were like swapping around fullbacks, going, who's the best one here? Who should we fit in? Like, was it Larmour? Was it Stockdale? Was it Hugo? And eventually, you know, through like, obviously people have to find their feet in a position like that as well, and get used to playing with the wingers around you, because, you know, depending on the defensive system or depending on the wingers, they might play different, you know, they might play differently. So it's just finding your feet and settling into that, really. But like, even little things that Rob did, if you're watching a game from like behind, or, you know, often when you're watching from TV, you don't see the work off the ball of the fullback. And I would have learned quite a bit about the back three from actually being at live games. And it's the stuff they do off the ball, like showing the 10 the space in behind, but then the minute they've made the decision to kick, you've already cut that space out, and the 10 looks like a fool for kicking the ball straight at the 15, but what the 15 has done was timed their run so that there is that space, so that the space is cut out. And it's the little things like that that we probably didn't acknowledge at the time, and Hugo's really doing a great job at it. Like, he mopped up everything there in the backfield, and just like I said, had really, really safe hands.
Are you jealous watching these games happening at the moment, going at some point soon I'd like to be out there?
I think the fact that the schedule was announced last week makes it a little bit easier. Had there been no schedule fixed, or had there been no Six Nations games, you know, in the horizon, I think it would have been hard to watch it. But like, it's always so exciting watching the Six Nations games, and it even gets us more excited for our own games, knowing that, like, you know, there's a chance and it will actually happen for a change.
Because we've been talking to some of your teammates, I think it was like at the start of last month, and training was like full bore as if it was going ahead on the normal schedule, and then news came that it had been put back. So what's the schedule like at the moment in terms of training and preparation?
Yeah, so after we got that announcement, we had 2 weeks off. So we were like, oh great, we're back to pre-season number 4. It was just like poor Orla, our S&C. I feel like she's done so many different schedules this year, depending, obviously, trying to taper us off for games. So she was building us up to Six Nations, and then next thing, cut again. So we had 2 weekends off there, which was actually lovely to have, because we trained the whole way through November, December, so it was nice to do that. But we were back in at the weekend, and like the change already, knowing that you have games, like it's great to be training, but knowing that Six Nations is actually coming up now, there's so much more bite at training, and like there's jerseys up for grabs, so girls are fighting for those jerseys. And again, at the end of the day, there's only 23 jerseys on a match day, and you can see the bite and the fire there already at training. So we're training this weekend. We were in last weekend, we're in this weekend, and we have a weekend off, and then after that we're full steam ahead until Six Nations. So it'll be busy, but I'm looking out the window here and there's snow, so I'm really happy that it's going to be in April and I don't have to play in some sort of snow.
It's a slightly different type of Six Nations. You don't play everybody. There's 2 groups. I think we're in with France and Wales. What's the level of expectation ahead of a tournament like that?
Yeah, look, it's a different format this year, obviously, because things are very different this year, and I suppose expecting teams to travel and do the amount of travel that's required within the Six Nations is probably difficult to monitor these days. But yeah, we've got a bye in the first round, and then we play Wales in the first game and then France in the second game. Look, Wales weren't good last year. They'll be disappointed with how they performed. And they're always a tough team, they're always tough to break down, but like we'd hope to have, we'd be looking to win that group. But I know people often say France are up there, they're semi-pro. They are, but Scotland drew with them last year. Italy beat them the year before in the Six Nations. Like, on any given day, with a good defensive system and a bit of heart, any team can get beaten. We played against France in a training camp there last November 12 months ago, and I think it made us realise that, like, look, they're not as good as we think they are. Like, they're the same as us. Like, we put it up against them in that training camp, and we actually never got to play them in that Six Nations, and then obviously never got to play them in November. But like, we can't wait to get a crack off them again. And like, everything in our squad has improved. Like, our defensive system has improved. We've gelled together as a squad. We finally have some continuity together as a squad where we know how each other play. We've been together for the guts of 3 years under Griggsy, 4 years under Griggsy here, and I think everyone's finally, like I said at the start, everyone backs each other to make decisions, and it's not just our 10 that jumps into first receiver. Like, if everyone knows the plays, backs or forwards, whatever it is, it's finally gelling together. So I think we're just super excited to get out and actually play, and we've done so much training. If we're not trained at this stage, I don't know when we'll ever be trained, but I think everyone is just super excited to get out and play the games. And like, we're in a good position that, I think we don't have a lot of injuries, which, is the benefit of not having games, because obviously that takes its toll on the body. So we're fresh going in with the full selection, which is really exciting.
Eimear, best of luck with it, and we wish your sister all the best in her recovery too.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Eimear was with us to launch the Aviva Mini Rugby Virtual Skills Hub, which will take place next week's midterm break from Monday the 15th to Friday the 19th of February. Check out aviva.ie/safe to dream team for more. We're back talking football with Daniel Harris out of the 5th round of the FA Cup, and David Moyes against Manchester United next.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB.
Long ball forward for Shaqiri to run onto. First time cross to Salah. He controls it and puts it past Fabianski. And that is a superb Liverpool counter-attacking goal.
OTB live commentary. Never miss the action right here on OTB Sports Radio. Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app. The OTB Sports app. Live score updates straight to your phone.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, study the form with our Racing Post Spotlight before watching the action with free live streaming on all UK and Irish horse races. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Physicality as well. He was so slight, wasn't he, when he first comes into the team? And obviously, an ex-teammate of mine, Lee Carsley, was coaching at Manchester City, and he was saying, "I've never seen a young player who can take the ball as comfortably as this." Now, bearing in mind, Lee Carsley would have been at Everton with Wayne Rooney when he burst onto the scene, and likewise with Robbie Keane with Ireland. I think he would have been there with Damien Duff at Blackburn as well. So that was high praise indeed. But then you're looking at the situation and thinking, well, listen, you're obviously a very talented young player, but to make a mark in the Manchester City team is going to be some ask. But now you look at the situation, he makes substitutions. Now Foden's staying on. He's taking off his more experienced players, and you can see why. He's so slight, he's effortless the way he covers the ground, and yet, even though he's so slight, opponents seem to bounce off him. That time he knocked it down the line and just showed the pace that he had against Fabinho to draw the foul. This player looks like he's got the whole world at his feet.
It was very interesting afterwards. Pep Guardiola was talking about Foden.
Yeah.
And he said, sometimes Phil still doesn't understand some positions and what you have to do. So in the first half, he wasn't in the right position that he should be in. But we'll work on that. He gets a little bit distracted in these issues. Playing wide's a bit easier for him. Hopefully he'll understand and improve because in the first half, he was not in the position we needed him to be in. But he will learn. And a bit like Sterling, when Guardiola got his hands on Sterling, we saw the footage and turning and just, turn your body out this way and all that kind of stuff. Man, Foden's going to get the right education here. I mean, he could be right place, right time in terms of the grounding he's about to get.
What an opportunity to work under that level of coaching as well. And there was a period, Joe, wasn't there, over the last year, 18 months, where people are saying Foden has to go out and play, he has to go on loan. And listen, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But even at the time, I was thinking, no, just let him be there with his brilliant players, with his brilliant manager, and let that be part of his education. And
Gary Breen there talking about Phil Foden on last night's football show. 16 minutes past 9 this morning here on OTB AM. Before 10 o'clock, we'll bring you Brian O'Driscoll. And right now we're talking football. A reminder, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the morning ahead. Daniel Harris, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Fifth round of the FA Cup. This is obviously about as exciting a tie as you could possibly have, because it pits David Moyes against Manchester United at a time when David Moyes looks like, for all the world, a very good, progressive, humble manager.
Yeah, I think the thing with David Moyes is a good manager. He did a great job at Everton. The thing, he wasn't the right manager for Manchester United, and he wasn't the right manager to take over from Alex Ferguson, but that not all managers are good at all jobs. I mean, most managers tend to fail somewhere, and it's about different jobs demand different skills, because finding players for Everton and judging the right players for Everton and playing in the style of Everton, and similar to West Ham, is really different from dealing right at the very top end, where the kind of personalities you have to deal with are different, the kind of football that's expected of you is also different. So because Moyes failing at United didn't make him not a good manager, and we're seeing at West Ham that he's done a fantastic job there.
What seems to have happened is that he's go on.
Do managers peak in your opinion, Daniel? Do they go through these ups and downs, like in terms of actually their capabilities and their abilities?
I'm not sure about that, because I think with most jobs that aren't physical, so obviously you naturally get rubbish at those the older you get, you're always learning. So I think we've seen that Jose Mourinho is probably an outlier in that aspect, because it feels with him that he's somehow been subsumed by the worst aspects of the character that made him a genius, and they've kind of defeated the good aspects. So it feels like he is kind of finished as a manager, but at least finished at the top end. And when I say that, I don't mean he's rubbish, but he's getting worse, not better. But anyone sensible learns from the mistakes that they made and learns from what they do, and is always thinking about the game differently and taking notice of the improvements that other people are making. And I think that there's no reason to think that David Moyes wouldn't have done that. So no, I don't see that he would necessarily have previously peaked, because you're always learning. And I mean, look at Roy Hodgson. I mean, he's still going, and I'm absolutely certain that he would think he's a better manager now than he was 20 years ago when he was only 78 years old.
I think the thing about Moyes is that he failed after he left Manchester United a couple of times. But it seems this time around he's actually used his time away from the game to go off and see what other clubs are doing, to go out and spend time at other clubs around Europe and to learn and to get the best of the statistical analysis that's happening in the data revolution and to incorporate parts of that into his management, which I think we would have assumed, probably wrongly, was just old school because he was anointed by Ferguson and Ferguson was of that old school. And that might have...
I think that all these people are always looking, they'll do anything to get an edge. So I think the idea that any of these guys would suddenly reject something that they could see other people were doing, and not only that, but the people who are succeeding at doing it, whether it's data or whether it's thinking about the game differently, you're dealing with extremely competitive and extremely hard individuals. So I think the thing with Moyes was that what happened at United hit him very hard. You can see it because he was constantly complaining in interviews years after he left that, I mean, when his contract ought still to have been running, where he was complaining that they should have given him time and he needed more time. And the fact that he was still going on about it showed that it bothered him. But it feels, as you say, like he has got back to thinking about what he does well. So when you look at West Ham, they look like a David Moyes team. They're big men who defend well, but their intention, although they're kind of set up in a defensive way, the intention is to go forward. And I think that is the thing about Moyes, is that it's finding that balance. Now, that balance wasn't right for Manchester United, who were at the time were champions and had really good players, but they were also aging players. And it is worth noting that the team he was left by Alex Ferguson was a champion team, but it was a team that was over the hill. And there was something about it that it was almost like there's this old contraption and only the crackpot genius inventor knows how to get it to work. And Moyes wasn't that. But when you look at Everton, when you look at his Everton team, they were hard and they were solid, but they also had some flair. Like Stephen Pienaar was a lovely player, for example. And I think that's what he's done at West Ham. Moyes respects flair. He doesn't necessarily know exactly how to generate it. And if he's faced with a choice, he's likely to choose a cautious option. But he understands that to have a good football team, you need players who can play. So he signed Benrahma. He's now signed Jesse Lingard. And he signed players who can play. And then he's also, what he was always good at was finding players. So he's done that with Thomas Souček, who was a brilliant signing. And West Ham also really good at set pieces, and they're good at attacking set pieces, and they're good at defending set pieces. And that kind of combination will always be difficult to resist, because ultimately, much as people seem to think otherwise, football doesn't change. The rules of the game are the same. And the things that score goals there'll always be slightly new wrinkles, but a near post corner hit hard and flat is going to always be difficult to defend. And it doesn't matter who the team is. It will always be the case.
If David Moyes had been backed at Old Trafford, what do you think his starting 11 would have looked like in year two, and how would it have evolved?
It's hard to know, because you don't quite know who he was going to sign. I mean, he thought he was going to sign Gareth Bale, and I think the story goes that he thought the Bale deal was done. And I remember he gave an interview, I think his second game, United drew 0-0 at home to Chelsea. It was a terrible game. And he gave this really strangely smug interview afterwards that suggested something big was about to happen. And I think the story goes that he thought he was getting Bale until the television showed him otherwise, and that Bale was going to Madrid. So the fact that he then went and panic bought Fellaini did not speak very well of what his plans were. But United did need a big overhaul, and whether he was ever going to get the money necessary to do that, I mean, he said no to Thiago and tried to get Fabregas, who ended up not coming. So he did have some idea of what was required. He also knew that United needed pace up front, because Rooney and Van Persie didn't have that. I mean, Van Persie never exactly had it, and Rooney was losing his pace. So he did know that. But I felt like he made those two big decisions. Like, one was Fellaini and the other one was Rooney, who obviously still had some quality because he was wearing Rooney. But Fergie had done everything but pack up his house for him and find him a new club. And for whatever reason, Moyes decided that he knew better than the manager who'd managed Rooney for all those years. I mean, perhaps he thought that that Rooney wasn't finished as a player, but that it was just a personal thing with Fergie. But Fergie almost fell out. I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head who Fergie fell out with until he was ready to fall out with them, because they were no longer of use to him. But Moyes committed to Rooney, which cost him a lot of money of his budget, and also left him a bit of a hostage to fortune, because once you keep Wayne Rooney, you have to keep picking him, because if you do pick him, it's a story, but if you don't pick him, it's an even bigger story. And he was the captain and the leader of the team. And I think that decision to sign Fellaini and that decision to keep Rooney made it really hard for Moyes to come back. So that by the time he went into the market again and he went for Juan Mata, who was not the right player, but you could see why he thought that he was, things were already quite a long way gone and quite messy, and it was really hard to get it back because the players had obviously decided that they weren't having him, and the support had also decided that they weren't having him. And as you say, as I think it's an advert, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. I think it was the old Lynx advert. I can get the whiff of Lynx Marine in my nostrils as I say it, but it's really hard to come back when you start as badly as Moyes did, and he couldn't turn it around. But that, as I said at the beginning, that doesn't mean he's not good at what he does, because he is. And West Ham is the perfect job for Moyes.
If he'd got Bale, what would have happened?
If what? Sorry?
If the Bale signing had happened, would that have been a transformative?
Yeah. You're talking about something very different at that point, because you're signing one of the best players in the world at the peak of his powers. So if that happens, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, you're adding 30 goals a season to your team, and you're probably making other people want to play for your team more as well. I don't think that United suddenly win the league under Moyes, because Ferdinand and Vidic were coming to the end, Evra was coming to the end, and there's nothing to suggest that Moyes has the ability to build a title-winning team. Doesn't mean he can't, but there's no evidence to say that he can. To build a title-winning team and to find players who are good enough to form that title-winning team. He's good at finding players who will get a mid-ranking team up to sort of the lower top rank. We know he can do that, but it's not clear that he knows what is required to win titles, because he's never done that before. But then, I mean, Louis van Gaal has done that before and he couldn't do it either. And Jose Mourinho has done that several times before and he couldn't do it either. So we can't criticise what David Moyes did at United without also criticising the owners, who weren't that interested in United being the best team, because they wouldn't put the money in that was necessary to do that. And when you're losing some of the greatest players that English football has ever seen, usually it's going to cost a lot of money to replace that, or it's going to take a lot of time. And neither of those things were forthcoming from Moyes.
One thing on the current season with David Moyes and the Jesse Lingard signing, as you mentioned a moment ago, is there a part of the Manchester United part of you that's just loving this, that is feeling warm and fuzzy seeing Jesse Lingard link up with David Moyes and seeing David Moyes being able to nurture Jesse Lingard and perhaps take him back to some level of form that he, I guess, did show at glimpses a couple of seasons ago for Manchester United?
I guess... I can only really answer that question as a United supporter, right? So I'm going to say I don't really associate David Moyes with Manchester United. He wasn't there for very long. The time that he was there went very badly. So I would love to see Jesse Lingard become the player that he is at his best and produce that consistently. But doing it with or without Moyes doesn't have very much emotional resonance for me, because Moyes doesn't have very much emotional resonance for me. But Jesse Lingard has an absolute stack of emotional resonance for me, because I saw him score the winning goal in an FA Cup final in extra time when United had 10 men. It was a brilliant goal, and I guess if it was the only time I feel I've ever cried at a football match. Because, ultimately, I guess whenever we cry, we're thinking about ourselves. And it's also probably fair to add that a drink had been taken. But what happened was that Saturday morning, I'd been to synagogue with my wife and my daughter. Well, I'd been first and they'd come afterwards. And they were racially profiled on the way in and prevented from entering. So a few hours later, after the aforementioned drink had or had not been taken, hard to say, to see, I guess, someone biracial score an unbelievable winning goal for United with 10 men was more than I could handle at that moment. So I do have a lot of emotional... Jesse Lingard does resonate for me emotionally. And I think it's also because he's He grew up playing for United. He achieved his dreams of playing for United. And as football supporters, I think we can all appreciate how moving that is when we see young players who've been at the club a long time make their name at that club. And then when they have a moment, and some of the other moments too that Jesse Lingard had, then we feel that deeply in our soul, because our football clubs are reflections not just of football, but of who we are, because often they're passed down to us through the generations. So by following them, we're not just doing things that we do, we're doing what our parents did, what our grandparents did, and the stories of those clubs and of the things that they've seen are passed down to us like family history. So we feel all of those deep in our soul, and they're expressions of family, of heritage, and of identity. And for me personally, Jesse Lingard is absolutely part of that.
And he played for England in the World Cup semi-final. So his career, when he sits back and starts doing the after-dinner circuit, he'll have some good stories about big games and having made it as well. I want to just ask you about this because Phil has pointed out it's 7 years to the day since Manchester United drew 2-2 against Fulham. It's under David Moyes. This was the game of crosses, a record 81 crosses against Fulham, who at the time were bottom of the table. Fulham scored an injury time equaliser. Do you remember that game? Have you done a full pod on that yet?
Who could forget that game? The game of the crosses. Who could forget that game? Yeah, I absolutely do remember that game. And I mean, it was one of many under Moyes that were just. I mean, I think people's hope had gone by this point. He lasted a few more months, but it felt like it was over at that point. And that is one of the things actually with all the post-Fergie managers. They all kept their jobs for longer than they should have done. Possibly because of contractual terms that meant they got less of a payoff if they got fired after Champions League hadn't been achieved. But it was the same with Van Gaal. I remember there was a dreadful game away to Stoke in December around Christmas of Van Gaal's second season. And United lost, I think they lost 2-0. It might have been 2-1, but they were absolutely walloped by Stoke. And at that point, you knew it was over. But he stuck it out until the end of May, until after the cup final. And similarly with Mourinho, in the summer before Mourinho's last season, or last half season, Edward had refused him Harry Maguire, then briefed to the press that he didn't think Harry Maguire was good enough and that kind of thing. And I might have been right about that. But if you're publicly challenging the footballing judgment of your manager as someone who could not know less about football and have no less expertise in football relative to Jose Mourinho, who's one of the greats of the game, it is time to part ways with that manager or leave your own job. And again, that didn't happen. And Mourinho stayed for another few months until things got even worse. And it was at that point that he got fired. So, yeah, I absolutely do remember that 2-2 against Fulham. I don't think anyone will forget that 2-2 against Fulham. And it's fair to say that I think that United now are better than they have been at any time since Fergie by a long way, but they still have some distance yet to travel.
Yeah, and so Tommy, who is our producer, who you know is a Manchester United fan, he's got the words bottling it beside the 3-3 draw that he wants me to ask. I don't think they're bottling these games because they're not good enough to bottle it just yet. If they were miles ahead of everybody else and just as good as Man City and they were drawing 3-3 with Everton in matches, then you would say they're bottling it. But to bottle it, you have to be really, really good in the first place.
Sort of. I think that Jamie Carragher did some good analysis on Everton's equaliser on last night, where he pointed out that he was saying when he was defending a free kick, he would always get really nervous when it was like a late free kick. And rather than have the line as high as the line should be, he would be more inclined to drop and just make sure that it was him that headed the ball away. And that was what he thought Harry Maguire was doing, because it was him who played everyone on side. And the problem was that the line was too high, and Harry Maguire was thinking, well, he's the captain of the team, so he's going to try and head that ball away. So there was an element of nervousness, but I also agree with what Tommy's saying, that all of the things that you would criticise this United team for, or all the things that you would say might go wrong, or even the things that look a bit unfortunate, they all add up to not being quite good enough at the end. I think that it is worth noting that the way that fixtures have fallen in City's favour. Obviously, they won at Liverpool at the weekend, and that was a great performance. But the 9 games that they won prior to that, 7 of them were against teams who were in the bottom 9. One was against Frank Lampard's Chelsea, just as they're in the process of getting the manager sacked and falling apart. And the other one was against Villa, where they had that ridiculous luck from the refereeing decision. So I think that you do want to note that, but ultimately City are the best team in the league. They're the best team in the league by a distance. And now they have this run of really difficult games. They've got no more gimmies left. Even if they start slipping, I don't think that anyone would expect United to put a run together that's good enough to punish them for that, because ultimately they're not good enough. The defence in particular isn't good enough, but the way they're attacking these days is really encouraging. And they've played much worse than they played against Everton this season and won games. But the way they were putting their attacks together, the way they were sustaining their attacks, the way they were threatening is making them look like what is a good team now. And they now need to make that jump from being a good team to being a really good team. And that's going to require some incremental and some internal improvements, what Wenger used to call internal solutions, but it's probably going to require another player or two as well.
Is finishing above Liverpool in the Premier League table this season satisfaction enough for Manchester United?
No, of course not. Finishing above, you want to finish above all the teams. Finishing above Liverpool would show improvement, but we do also need to note that much as people seem desperate to invent excuses for why Liverpool are where they are, the main reason is still the injuries. And you could say that Jurgen Klopp made a mistake in not predicting that these injuries might happen, given the fixture list, and just given his lack of strength, depth and centre-back. You could also criticise the board for not giving him the money, or as much money as he needed, if that's what happened, or order the technical team for not insisting that he sign at least one more centre-back at the beginning of the season. But the main reason still for why Liverpool are where they are is the injuries, though there are other important reasons, like the mental, physical stress of succeeding for so long, of playing the way that Klopp likes them to play, teams finding them out, all of those things. But yeah, so finishing above Liverpool is an improvement. If United can finish second, that would be an improvement. If they can finish closer to the top than they did last season, that would also be an improvement. But it will never be satisfactory, because satisfactory is winning the league. And even then, you're always still looking for an edge. Like, that's the best teams, the best players, the best managers, the best at anything in any sport, any field of human endeavour, always looking at how they can improve and never quite satisfied. I remember Ryan Giggs saying that he always hated the unsuccessful summers, the summers that followed unsuccessful seasons, much more than he enjoyed the summers that followed successful seasons. And it's that kind of attitude that drives winners on to become repeat winners. And what United need to do is they do need to find that mentality, because we have seen games recently where they haven't pressed enough to win. I mean, that point at Anfield suddenly doesn't look like a great point when you see Burnley win there. I mean, everyone's winning there. You see City going there and absolutely taking them apart. And United aren't good enough necessarily to take Liverpool apart, but they were good enough on that day to take it to Liverpool more than they did. And I think given the team that United are, that is necessary, because they're not ruthless in front of goal yet. And so when in a game where you only create 2 or 3 good chances, United aren't a team who you think are good enough to rely on scoring one of 2 or 3 chances. And they drew 0-0 at home to Chelsea, they drew 0-0 away to Arsenal, and they drew 0-0 at home to Man City. And the attitude with which they approach those games is not the attitude with which champions generally approach games. And after they beat Liverpool in the Cup, I felt like that was a sea change, because it was the first time that they'd gone up against a good team and just looked to impose their game.
Yeah.
They haven't worried too much about what might happen to them and looked at what they were going to do. Well, and that looked like a sea change, and I was pleased to see that. And Ole even referred to it after the game. But then they went to Arsenal and they played again within themselves.
Yeah.
They played a midfield of Fred and McTominay, and they ended up with another 0-0, and it was costly.
Well, look, we'll see what happens tonight. Daniel, good stuff. Thanks a million.
No, I was going to see you again, lads. Have a good day, everyone.
Daniel Harris giving us some thoughts there. That game in the FA Cup tonight. We'll talk about it on tomorrow's show as well. A reminder, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Let's bring you this now. It is Brian O'Driscoll in conversation with Joe Malloy, talking about our disappointing start to the 2021 Six Nations.
Brian O'Driscoll, evening.
Good evening, Joe. How are you?
Very well. Let's start in Cardiff. What a sickener. Yeah,
it was. On on a few fronts, obviously. Test rugby at the best of times away from home in the Six Nations is hard with 15 men, and then you reduce yourself by one for 67 minutes of the contest. It makes it increasingly more challenging. So if you kind of take the first section where it was a little bit of a slow start, and even though we had good possession, it felt as though probably the momentum, the early exchanges were with Wales, although it was a 3-point game by the time Peter O'Mahony got sent off. But then, you flip the remaining 67 minutes, and so many positives to take out of it on the back of, hard graft and, spirited performance, individuals really stepping up. Tadhg Furlong coming back, forgotten what we've been missing with him. It was so exciting. We thought Andrew Porter had done a phenomenal job until you see the extra skill set that Furlong provides. So it's a sickener because we put ourselves in a position, first of all, to see the game out, and then we gave up some sloppy tries, but then not giving ourselves one final shot in the corner when we'd done all that hard graft is a real sickener and a pretty bitter pill for Andy Farrell to have to swallow, with the knowledge that we've got an informed France team coming to the Aviva Stadium this weekend.
Yes, and on my point about the French being fresh and well rested by comparison with the Irish, who after yesterday, will have a lot of sore bodies. That was test match rugby and all its physicality laid bare. you've been through games akin to that. It's what, Wednesday, Thursday before you feel yourself again?
Yeah, and well, it obviously depends on what, how old the bones are as well, and what sort of mileage you've got on the clock as well. There'll be some guys, or indeed what position you're playing. You think about the likes of Cian Healy, that must be in his 14th or 15th season. He put in a good 50-minute shift. So I'd only anticipate he's always been a bit of a freak athlete, but you'd have to imagine the cumulative effect of that much test rugby over 100 test matches is going to take effect on your recovery. And on top of everything, everyone well knows that when you win a game, the body never feels quite as bad as when you lose one. So the recovery becomes more important now, but more difficult at the same time, more challenging because of the mood in the camp, because of the disappointment in the camp. But on the flip side, whenever you win a game, your coach is always trying to keep you in check as to things you can improve on. I think Andy Farrell will be flipping that and talking about, in this loss, so many good things were done, and so many, people really put their hand up and turned out some really impressive individual performances. I think you have to remember as well with Test Rugby, when you lose someone for 67 minutes, it's one of your main operators at line-out time, both for and opposition ball. He's our go-to guy. When it comes to rucking, he's one of our best jacklers of the ball. And every launch play that you have, it means you have to put one of your backs in to make sure you win the scrum. So you completely negates your ability to attack off set piece, which is a huge component of what Ireland have done for the last number of years. So straight away, you're eating into some of your quality platforms to be able to deliver some success. So yeah, very disappointing because it's a result-based business, but it was there for the taking, considering the tries that they offered up.
Yeah, and maybe damning of Wales as well, that against 14 men for 70 minutes, they didn't tear us open a bit more. For instance, Ron O'Gara said 15-man Ireland beat Wales by 10. What's your take, in so much as we can be sure?
Yeah, I think once that initial chess match had happened, I do feel as though Ireland are playing their way into the game. We know that they're a possession-based team. They still had huge possession. I didn't see the end of the game possession, but it was over 60% in the first half with one less man. So, that's going to, that's a hallmark of Irish teams these days. So I do feel as though with Peter O'Mahony on the pitch for 80 minutes that you'd have to have fancied Ireland. Think about that extra body in the defensive line, the extra spacings, the extra, occasional turnover or nuisance in the ruck. All of those aspects add up to the end result. And I think what's so hard is when they reflect on it and look at that game, you think about that George North try that was against the run of play from Ireland trying to play maybe a bit of a loose offload from Gary Ringrose, and then compounded issue with Conor Murray not just trying to kill the ball and offload to Ian Henderson, who then also knocks it on. And 2 phases later, out of nowhere, with a penalty advantage, George North is running in for a pretty easy try. That's a real sickener. That takes the wind out of your sails. And it was kind of against the run of play too. And when you've done all that work in the build up to it for, I don't know what time that was, but for 50, 55, 60 minutes, and the momentum's with you, that can be such a swinger. And it ends up being because Wales then got their tails up.
The defining moment of the match on 13 minutes, Peter O'Mahony's red card. You have cleared out your fair share of rooks. Talk us through his and then your perspective on the whole thing, watching from afar. But so he's trying to lay down a marker.
Yeah, like you're trying to get into Pete's head. He's a physical player, uncompromising. Tom Francis has made a tackle, and then he's sort of floating around the ruck, trying to be a bit of a nuisance. I think Pete's probably just trying to tell him that if you do that again, you're gonna know about it. The problem is he stepped beyond the line, and we know now that any head collisions, also the manner in which his arm is cocked as well, makes it a kind of a double negative. If he's got it in a position where it looks like a genuine clear out, it might just be perceived as being mistimed or misplaced, whereas it looks as though there's a bit of intent with it, unfortunately. And Pete can't have any issues with being red carded. Once you saw the initial replay, it was clear as day, and very disappointing from his perspective, from Ireland's perspective. We also have to deal now with no Peter O'Mahony for certainly the next couple of games, and it's it must be hard. I've never been sent off in my career, but it must be hard watching as your team play their way back into it, but then lose it kind of towards in the last quarter, when you know that your efforts would have been rewarding to the team. So it's a real sickener from the collective and from the individual perspective.
Yeah, I'm sure he's in the absolute horrors looking back on it. Wayne Barnes talked about it being high, about it being dangerous, and he mentioned the chicken wing, the arm cocked, as you said. What's the logic of the arm cocked?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know. It's again, you're trying to get into Pete's head with it. He was just trying to come in and obviously, I'm sure there was no intent with trying to actually hit him in the head. But when you're doing that and trying to be excessively physical, you have to make sure that you get your timing right and you get your point of contact right, and it's non-negotiable anymore. And that they're the situation, particularly when you've got time coming into the ruck. That wasn't a kind of a snap decision. He had a lead into it, and he was able to target Francis, but he got it wrong and paid the price.
So how would you have had your arm going into a ruck generally?
In a perfect world, you have it, up by your side, as if it's almost like you're going in to make a tackle as well. If you have it in a tackling position, you stand some sort of chance, because technically you're meant to be grasping onto the individual to try and drive them through. It's not just a collision base and we see it in rucks the whole time. Players fly in and just using their shoulder. We saw actually a brilliant clear out. So it was on the letter of the law, the question marks, the legitimacy of it from Cian Healy for the Byrne try, but when Ken Owens came in, slid in illegally, and Cian Healy came in, and I don't think his arm was cocked, but he came in and just shoulder barged him out of it. It was a phenomenal clear out, something that's never going to get picked up on. But on the ruling and the technicality, you're meant to bind onto the individual rather than just using shoulder barge. So it's that nuance of the game that World Rugby are still trying to work out, because we've seen sendings off in the past. We saw one of the Barrett brothers getting sent off for a head collision on Michael Hooper. Was it not this year's Tri-Nate or Super Championship, but the previous year? And it's a really tough one, because when someone leads with their head close to the line, what are you meant to do? Now that was again adjudicated as a red card, and rightly so. But Pete can't have any problems with his one. It was one of the more clear red cards, and I don't know what he said to Wayne Barnes coming off, but he just couldn't have had any complaints. And on reflection, he'll absolutely agree with the referee's decision.
Ireland gave away 4 penalties in the first 13 minutes. 3 of them were courtesy of Peter O'Mahony, and he was sent off against Scarlets in October. He got 2 yellow cards. There was an off-the-ball tackle, and then he went into the ruck with the shoulder again against Scarlets. So that's a bit of a trend. I mean, if he was 22, we'd be saying, look, he'll get to grips with what he can do and what he can't do. But he's 32 years of age, and we saw him fired up before kick-off. He's a leader in that way, but there's a point where if in 13 minutes you're giving away 4 penalties, getting a red card, and you've already been sent off this season, you probably have to have a sit down and a think about things and reflect on finding a better balance.
Yeah, well, he's obviously getting he's channeling that aggression in a negative way in those situations. The yellow card or the red card earlier on this season, one of the yellow cards might have been perceived as being a little bit soft. The second one definitely wasn't. And this is as blatant a red card as you're likely to get. There's very few people, even on social media, trying to put up a case for him. I think I saw one individual saying it's only a yellow card. I don't know what world that's a yellow card, and certainly not this one that we play in anymore. And we talk about protecting players and duty of care to players, particularly when they're in uncompromising positions, whether they're legal or not, or whether they're trying to be a nuisance. You can't take the law into your own hand. You can hurt them, but you got to hurt them legally and remind them that that's not the place that they can be. And sometimes that target isn't there. Sometimes you can't get that shot on their body, so you got to let it go and wait for the next opportunity when they're lying somewhere illegally, to make sure you hit them somewhere below their shoulder line. Try and get a good shot into ribs or something where they leave themselves open, and just to let them know. And actually there's some verbals afterwards. I was watching Pete. We had a little word to Thomas Francis as well about you don't do that again. You get away from my ruck ball. But it must have been something that he looked up and smiled and thought, you're in trouble here anyway. I don't know what the verbals are about.
Well, he appealed straight away to Barnes. Barnes, interestingly, said, no, unavoidable. But then the replay did Peter O'Mahony no favours.
Why we have TMOs, right? Sometimes referees want to see the best case scenario, and that's why we've got another set of eyes where they're able to pick the referee up on little things that they've missed. That's why we have 4 referees ultimately, the 2 assistants, the man in charge, but also that set of eyes to be able to let the game carry on, but to pull the ref up on foul play. And so I think they dealt with it really well. It's okay. I'm okay with Wayne Barnes thinking that it was incorrect. Referees won't get every collision right, and particularly they're trying to speed up the pace of the game. So that's why he's got a second set of eyes in a booth somewhere to go, no, hang on, let's come back to that. It's a pity he didn't come back to the Johnny Williams one a little bit later on, but I don't think that was a red card, I have to say.
What was that, yellow?
Well, you know what? I don't think you could properly guarantee that was a collision direct to Gary Ringrose' head from the angles that we saw. I think he had this massive head jolt, but on the angle that we saw, even in slow-mo, the one from behind Gary Ringrose, you see his head shooting back, but you can't technically see the point of contact. Now, the point of contact is, first of all, on the jaw, it's a red card. I don't think there's the mitigation of body height is any good, or late change of direction. I think a very generous referee might consider one of those 2 and give a yellow card. But I think it's impossible on the basis of the angles that we saw. I'm sure there were other angles that the referee or the TMO never called on, and maybe he saw them and decided there was no case to answer. But it looked really bad, and it felt as though it warranted a kind of a minute of viewing to make sure that if you're going to be sending Pete off for his incident, that we get all decisions correct. So I don't know whether there's going to be anything that will come of that, but again, like I said, on the footage that we saw, you couldn't guarantee anything.
Suddenly then Ireland are down to 14 men, they're 6-0 down, and I think everybody feared the worst. And suddenly then at the break, Ireland are leading by 7, and they've obviously done a lot of good things across the remaining 70-odd plus minutes of this match, and you mentioned lots of positives. So why don't we delve into that? What did Ireland do well in this game? Why are we slightly, not buoyed, but we're certainly not down in the dumps about this defeat?
Well, I think first of all, you think about who's played really well for Ireland, who's been standout performers for Ireland consistently over the last during the Andy Farrell tenure. And I don't know if you could pick an individual out that's been, consistently very, very good over the last year. But I think what you have seen in the last 3 or 4 games is the likes of Hugo Keenan, who's come in for his first cap against Italy at the end of last year's Six Nations, and now his first start at fullback. I thought he had a very, very good game. It felt as though he's the security that you want at fullback. I think, I was calling for him to play there while Stockdale was playing there in the November internationals. It just feels as though Jacob Stockdale's the perfect fit for the wing and Hugo Keenan's the perfect fit for fullback. He didn't do everything perfectly. He missed, one high ball, spilled a pass, and didn't have the vision to be able to miss Larmour once towards the end of the game where, a pass over the top with Wales pressing hard. Could have been a line break and could have led to an opportunity to score when we really needed one. So there's some things that in his game that will need a little bit of ironing out, but his last-ditch tackling, his reading of the game, his ability to work into space to create overlaps, those sort of things were a real point of difference. So, he's one, real positive. Ty Byrne, in the second row, I thought had a really, really positive game, from clearing rooks out on his own, single man success at ruck time when there was the potential for being turned over, from being a nuisance at the ruck, carried very well. We've accused him in the past of kind of vanishing in games where he dips in and out. I thought it was a very complete performance across the board. Very harsh penalty given against him. Ultimately, the one that cost Ireland the game, because that was the 5-point differential then where they had to go to the corner. I thought Wayne Barnes just read what I can't exactly remember what he said today when I was looking back, but it was something. It was the tackles on. I was like, I've never heard that before. I actually contacted another referee that I know, and I inquired about it, and that referee said, no, that's play on. Again, I'm not here to point fingers at Wayne Barnes. I think Wayne Barnes did a good job, and he is a good referee, but I think he got that wrong. I think the point of where that ball was placed, first man is entitled to go in and play it, provided he doesn't play the scrum half. And that's what he did. And I thought he got a little bit whistle happy on that one. And that was the difference, because Ireland could have kicked that final penalty and it would have been a 2-point game up to then. So, it's, there's two individuals, but also just the grittiness, just the willingness to stay in the fight, the ability to hold possession when you're an extra man down. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. And at times did we kind of run around without creating a huge amount. But we know that that's what Ireland do an awful lot of the time. We haven't been given creating great chances for our wide men, giving them time with ball in hand in the open spaces. We just haven't done that. But we are kind of grinding teams down and forcing them into penalties and forcing them into errors. And then, the occasional moment of magic, brilliant. I should really make reference to Robbie Henshaw's performance as well. He's in the form of his life.
That's about as well as he's played for Ireland ever, isn't it?
For me, Ireland's man of the match, definitely. Even though I mentioned, Keenan and Byrne, I think Henshaw is in outstanding form on both sides of the ball. So physical with George North running into his channel and, won so many of those collisions. But his ability to get Ireland the hard yards, running to soft shoulders, getting an extra metre or two, something that James Ryan does in close quarters, of just trying to get the opposition on the back foot. And he did that time and time again. And then the creation of the try for Byrne. Actually, it was a beautiful little blocker line that Porter ran. He was the one that kind of stood in the way of Wyn Jones, who should have been the insurance policy for Tipperick on the inside, but Porter blocked him off, and that's why Henshaw got through. Beautiful offload and brilliant from Van der Fleer not to go reach and getting white line fever, and then Byrne nearly spilled it, but a great try. So those small little individual moments, that mental toughness of hanging in there, not feeling sorry for yourself, and digging in, right to the death. And it could have been on another day, you could have found a 5 metre line out and one where at least we could have gotten a draw and potentially a kick to win the Six Nations match against the odds.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.